Chapter 407. Beligaju didn't raise his head. His delicate kisses fell on her fair neck, as if he was tasting the sweetest pastry. Helene Vivian's fingers couldn't help but tremble from the waves of numbing heat. However, she knew that at this time, she really wasn't suited for such intimate actions. She flipped over and stood up from the bed. Bailey Jiaju raised his eyebrows and looked at the young girl in front of him. Clean and stubborn, a pair of limpid eyes softly looked at him, making people's hearts couldn't help but slightly tremble. A deep dark color gushed out from the depths of Bailey Jiaju's eyes. He liked to talk to her. However, he liked to see her tremble even more. He couldn't help but want to get closer. He couldn't help but want to hold on tighter. It should be done tonight. He wanted to see how long she could endure. Bailey Jiaju smiled faintly. His raised eyebrows and slightly narrowed eyes were filled with a sense of black-bellied. Helene Vivian didn't care about Beligaju anymore. She only wanted to find Hei's quickly and ask for the maids who were guarding her, in case anything went wrong. I've already prepared everything for you. Hei smiled meaningfully. However, do you really plan to hold on by yourself? Helene Weiwei replied with a and packed up all the things that she needed. Hei looked behind her and raised his eyebrows. I'm afraid some people won't agree. ? Helene Vivian just raised her head. An arm wrapped around her waist and pulled her back forcefully. Beligaju was behind her. He coldly said to Hei, stay away from her in the future. Otherwise, you know very well what this highness will do to you. For example, that little green plum of yours.
Hei.
Fuck. Does this count as him getting shot while lying down? And Bailey Jiaju, who had dragged Helene Weiwei away, directly pressed her against a corner. With one hand propped against the wall, the light in his eyes slightly deepened. Come, tell me, why in the world do you always look for Heize? Yes. Helene Vivian touched her wrist, which was hurting. Ask him for help to get a few maids. Tonight is the night of the full moon. I need them. Beligaju was so jealous that he was about to bubble. He gritted his teeth and said, you have my mark on you, and then you talked about dual cultivation with another man? I just asked him for help. Helene Vivian was obviously lacking in confidence, although she didn't know why she lacked confidence. Beligaju narrowed his eyes dangerously. How could this person dare to say such words at this point? Could it be that he had not expressed himself clearly enough? Very, very good. He wanted to see how long it would take for that thick head of hers to be enlightened. He was really too good to this little thing. How could she forget that some people had to stab her a few times before she would understand what self-reflection was? Helene Vivian didn't know what he meant by that. However, when it was time for lunch, she saw that there were two girls beside the royal family who usually didn't eat in public. Both of those girls were very delicate and pretty. They probably felt that the third prince was very easy to get close to today. Once they came in, they smiled at everyone. So they couldn't help but want to talk to him. After all, the selection of the secondary consort was about to begin. Beligaju didn't talk to them, but he didn't drive them away either. The two girls thought that their chance had come. They slightly lowered their eyes and blushed. This was the scene that Helene Weiwei saw when she came in. Bailey Jiaju was sitting opposite those two young girls, like a moon surrounded by a myriad of stars. She tried hard to suppress the discomfort in her heart. She took the bamboo chopsticks from Hei's and ate a few mouthfuls of rice, but she didn't have much appetite. But she knew that she had to eat. Otherwise, how could she have the strength to resist the tormenting full moon night? Hei's rested his chin on his hands on the table and watched with interest as Helene Vivian's coldness increased rapidly. He followed her gaze and found the third prince. Then, he found that the third prince was calmly dealing with people, but his eyes were always glued to his little sister's back. Hei smiled and raised his thin lips. Interesting, really interesting. However, he didn't want Helene Vivian to notice anything. The third prince was too cunning. He couldn't let Vivian fall into his trap. Helene Vivian felt that she needed to be alone. After eating, she simply carried her self-made fishing rod and ran to the back of the mountain, preparing to bait the fish in the pond. Little seventh prince saw it and walked over with his 2 short legs. Third sister-in-law, what are you doing? Fishing? Hellion Vivian tugged at the fishing rod. That's strange. It's been almost an hour, and not a single fish has taken the bait. Third sister-in-law, let me try. The little seventh prince's face was full of vigor, looking very confident. Hellion Vivian passed the fishing rod to him. In less than a second, the fish came up. It was very big and very fat. When Wei Wei looked at that fish, her indolent face was covered with dark clouds in a flash. She only saw one after another big fish with plump figures in the previously empty fish basket cheerfully swaying back and forth. Each and every one of their big mouths opened and closed, as if they were provoking her. Pfft, what's the big deal? Hellion Vivian leaned over and looked at the big fish jumping around in the basket. The corner of her mouth slightly raised. You fish are too open to lust. You don't know how to be reserved when you see a handsome young man. No wonder you became someone's meal. As she said this, she patted little seventh prince's shoulder. With a serious expression, she said, Not bad. You used the handsome young man trick very well. Little seventh prince. Hellion Vivian touched her chin, as if she thought of something. She suddenly smiled. Little seventh prince, go and get 2 of the explosives that I developed a few days ago. After a while, there was a rumbling sound. 2 muffled explosions sounded from the mountain behind the White Academy. A few shadow guards who followed Hellion Vivian appeared when they heard the sound. Smelling the thick smell of gunpowder, they looked towards the pond. The fishes were all frightened and jumped out of the water, as if they had seen a demon. The princess consort was looking at the pond with a smug expression. The seventh prince was looking up at her with eyes full of worship. Drops of cold sweat appeared on the foreheads of the shadow guards at the same time. They all felt that their princess consort was not in a good mood today. Not in a good mood? Beligaju, who was leaning on the bush, listened to the subordinate's report. His thin lips curved, and then he followed Hellion Vivian, who was tidying up the fish basket. Hellion Vivian, of course, knew that someone was following behind her. She stopped and looked at him. Your Highness, why are you following me instead of choosing a secondary consort? There are no secondary consorts. Beligaja's voice was indifferent. Hellion Vivian smiled. Weren't there 2 just now? They came over on their own initiative. When Beligaja spoke, it always made people feel that he was smiling, so someone has to hurry up. Otherwise, the position will be taken away. Chapter 408. Then let it be snatched away. Hellion Vivian's tone was slow. I don't like to snatch things from others the most. Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian in front of him, and the smile on his face suddenly turned cold. His dark purple eyes were instantly tainted with evil. He pinched Hellion Vivian's chin and slowly reached out to press his thumb against Hellion Vivian's pale lips. He said, Are you telling the truth now? Hellion Vivian swallowed a mouthful of saliva because of Beligaju's actions. Beligaju chuckled softly. He gently stroked Hellion Vivian's thin lips and held Hellion Vivian's hands. Don't even think about giving up this position. At this moment, Hellion Vivian once again experienced Beligaju's strength. Her hands seemed to be fixed halfway by iron, and she couldn't resist at all. Beligaju said, Did you forget what I warned you? Hellion Vivian stopped moving. What? Beligaju smiled. That smile was gentle no matter how one looked at it, but there was a hint of unhappiness in his eyes. He said, If you lie to me, I'll remove your claws.
So, what if it's a lie?
Hellion Vivian didn't even think and blurted out, You'll still have a harem after all. Only after that did she realize what she had said. In an instant, her neck, face, and even the corners of her eyes turned red. After she reacted, she turned around and wanted to leave. She didn't want to look at that person's smug expression. But Beligaju was faster than her. He pulled her over, raised her chin, and kissed her. That's enough. Hearing the embarrassment in Hellion Vivian's voice, Beligaju finally bit his tongue before reluctantly withdrawing. He then lovingly leaned forward to lick Hellion Vivian's red eyes. His fingers gently rubbed the smooth skin on the inside of his palm as he waited for Hellion Vivian to calm her breathing. Hellion Vivian only felt her whole body go limp, comfortable and a little embarrassed. Beligages smirked and touched her forehead. His eyes were deep. Well, what is the truth you want to say? Xiao Qi, who was carrying the fish basket, raised his tiger head and looked at the two people in front of him. Then his gaze landed on Hellion Vivian. Third sister-in-law, what happened to your face? Why is it so popular? The weather is too hot. Hellion Vivian vaguely explained, but her eyebrows furrowed. Truth? Beligage knew that he couldn't force a certain kind of animal too close. His slender fingers loosened, and then he glanced at his strong-looking younger brother. He ordered in a calm voice, "Look after your third sister-in-law, don't let her wander around." Yes. Little seventh prince believed that he was invincible when it came to completing missions. Hellion Vivian didn't listen to the words of the adult and the child. After watching Beligage's slender figure walk away, she casually found a cool patch of grass and lay down. She bit on the grass and began to think about life. As a responsible man, little seventh prince was very worried about his third sister-in-law being alone here. He decided to sacrifice the time he had to eat meat buns to accompany her. He strode with his short and thick legs and began to catch crickets around her. Hellion Vivian didn't know how she and Beligage got to this point. They were just helping each other. But weren't they helping each other a little too thoroughly? Their previous kisses were all because of some things. But today, thinking of this, Hellion Vivian couldn't help but cover her mouth with one hand. The tips of her ears turned a little red. She could clearly feel that when Beligage kissed her, there was some kind of surging emotion. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly went into a frenzy. Then, it beat deafeningly, and her chest felt sore and numb. As if she had been enlightened, many inadvertent scenes and details connected. The anxiety in his eyes when he looked at her, teasing her with half-truths, tricking her into signing the contract. Then what about her feelings for him? Hellion Vivian lacked love in her previous life. She didn't even touch the line in the relationship between a man and a woman. Now that she thought about it, if he said like to her, Hellion Vivian didn't have time to think before her heart reacted. It seemed to be a little uncomfortable, but it also beat very fast. Her face also felt a little hot. She had read about this before. It said that if a person liked the opposite sex, first of all, when she thought of him, her heart would beat faster. Then, she wouldn't be able to resist the other party's kiss. Then, after kissing, her face would turn red and her hands and feet would go soft. It seemed that it was all right. Her chest felt like it was stung by something. It was a little numb and also a little itchy. Hellion Vivian rolled on the grass and reached out to cover her eyes. It seemed a little bad. Hellion Vivian gasped for breath. Her heart was beating fast. She wanted to use her palm to cool down her hot cheeks, but found that her whole body's temperature was the same. It was so hot that her eyes almost overflowed with tears. An indescribable feeling came from an invisible place. It was like a small hook that pulled at her pulse. "Woman, it's almost dusk." Yuan Ming's voice sounded from the fantasy space. Hellion Vivian stood up. Her breathing was a little fast. "I know what to do. From now on, you and Sha Bai will stay in the fantasy space.
Don't come out again."
"Wait, I'll say one last thing. You really don't want to consider." Yuan Ming didn't finish his words. Hellion Vivian closed the fantasy space. She casually threw a piece of beef jerky to Xiao Qi and told him to play by himself. Then, she called a few maids over and had them guard the back of the mountain. She walked towards the hot spring surrounded by clouds. But Hellion Vivian still underestimated the effects of dual cultivation on the body. She didn't expect that it would be so painful before the sky turned dark. Hellion Vivian didn't even take off her outer robes. She directly soaked herself in the water to cool down a little. However, she didn't know that a certain highness had been following behind her the whole time. "Are you going to move aside yourselves, or do you want me to do it?" Beligaju looked indifferently at the four maids in front of him. The maids glanced at each other. They were very loyal to Hellion Vivian. Beligaju curved his thin lips and summoned the fire Qilin. "Block them. You also don't follow in." Do you understand? He said the last 3 words very slowly, with a thick coldness. The Fire Qilin, who originally wanted to watch the show, tensed up and said in a steady voice, "Yes, my respected master." Beligaju strolled in. His posture was slow and elegant. As he walked, his slender fingers unbuttoned his collar. An unprecedented evil smile appeared on his face.
Ha!
He had waited for this day for too long. Chapter 409. Bailey Jiaju knew that he had tormented her miserably, but it was undeniable that he liked this kind of feeling. He also wanted to be gentle, but he didn't know why. But once he touched her body, the ruthlessness in his heart couldn't be concealed. He even wanted to bite her throat when she stretched her neck. He wanted to taste her blood and see if her blood was sweet as well. He couldn't do this. Beligaju clenched his hands. He had to control himself. She wouldn't like to see him lose his mind and only know how to kill. Beligaju took a deep breath. The demonic red light in his eyes gradually faded away. He reached out and stroked Hellion Vivian's hair, leaving a gentle kiss on her forehead. Then he smiled evilly. Even if he didn't like her, he would keep her by his side.
Whoosh!
The night wind blew through the treetops. The azure dragon, who was sleeping at the bottom of the lake, seemed to have sensed something. It suddenly flipped, and the entire lake became uncontrollable. The man in white took 2 heavy steps back. Blood seeped out from his thin lips. The little one with the gourd on his back gritted his teeth and called out anxiously, "Master?" "I'm fine." The man in white brushed his finger across the corner of his mouth. His eyes darkened. The little one frowned. "What's wrong with the azure dragon? It was fine before. Is it not used to being tamed?" The man in white didn't say anything, but his dark and narrow eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of unfathomable fog. The azure dragon was still flipping in the lake. Its eyes were red, and it seemed to be in a daze. "Master, master," it seemed to have smelled its master's scent. "Master, is that you?" The azure dragon sent out its consciousness, but what answered it was dead silence. The silence didn't fade away for a long time. That's right. How could it be its master? If it really was its master, it would be impossible for it not to receive its consciousness. It didn't have any more hope. The azure dragon lowered its eyes and sank to the bottom of the lake. The next day, when Hellion Weiwei woke up, she only felt that her 2 legs did not feel like her own. When her feet stepped on the floor, they felt a little weak. However, her body seemed to have recovered a lot, and her whole body felt warm and comfortable. Yuan Ming urged her in the Xuanhuan space. "Woman, try your martial qi now, and see if you can use your qi." Hellion Vivian nodded. She raised one hand and felt the airflow coming from her dantian. With a force, the teacup on the table was smashed into pieces. In the past, she could only manipulate feng shui, but now her martial qi could materialize like other people. "Your man is indeed the most nourishing medicine for devil cultivators." Yuan Ming's voice was filled with excitement. "According to this development, if you do it 2 more times, I will be able to completely recover." TSK, 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 that third prince is simply inhuman. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. Don't say such things in front of him. His Highness shouldn't want to be treated as his personal medicine-gathering furnace. As a domineering CEO, what she should do now was to find a way to chase after His Highness. Even though he was now her husband in name, she still couldn't help it. But that face of his was a bit too good at attracting bees and butterflies. In addition, it was obvious that His Highness was not enlightened when it came to relationships. Well, he was even slower than her. So, if she wanted to chase after someone, she had to do it quickly. Hellion Vivian thought about the conversation with His Highness yesterday. He didn't seem to care much about whether or not she was the one who was possessed. Thinking about it carefully, his reaction at that time seemed to indicate that he already knew something. Hellion Vivian smiled. That's right, if he wanted to investigate her, how could she hide it from him? It was more practical to chase after someone seriously. Hellion Vivian thought of this and ordered someone to call Xiao Qi over. "Do you know what your third brother likes to do the most?" Hellion Vivian asked as she opened a book. Xiao Qi held the meat bun bribed by his third sister-in-law and took a bite. He glanced at the book and almost doubted if he had read it wrong. What the hell was that? 108 moves to chase after his wife. Third sister-in-law, don't read strange books. It's not good. Xiao Qi looked fierce. Hellion Vivian tapped her fingers on the table. Answer my question first. Oh. Xiao Qi raised his head and thought for a while. Third brother's favorite thing to do is to sleep. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. Except for this. Killing people. Xiao Qi said excitedly. Third brother even smiles when he kills people. Hellion Vivian. Can't there be a more normal answer? Forget it. I'll just follow the routine. Hellion Vivian put the book in her hand into her clothes and smiled handsomely. First of all, flowers are essential.
So.
That day, Hellion Vivian held a bunch of roses and gave them to Beligaju in front of everyone. The smile on her face couldn't be more charming. However, His Highness, who was dealing with the memorials, only raised his eyes to look at her. Then, he pulled her hand over and wiped it with a handkerchief. His voice was calm. In the future, don't hold these messy things. It's dirty. Hellion Vivian, dirty? He actually thought the roses were dirty?
Haha.
She really couldn't look at His Highness with normal eyes. But she wouldn't give up. The unexpected difficulty of the royal family completely ignited Hellion Vivian's fighting spirit. After retreating, she was ready to make a comeback. To be honest, Nangong Lai was a little dumbfounded when he saw this. He thought that he was a man who had never been touched by a woman before. However, he had never seen a woman like Hellion Vivian who gave flowers to a man. And it was roses. Nangong Lai looked at the fiery red flowers and reached out to touch them. However, he was nailed to the ground by Beligaju's gaze. That gaze was extremely cold. Who allowed you to touch my things? Bailey Jiaju strolled over and held the bunch of roses in his arms. His long and narrow eyes flashed with a trace of a gentle, smiling expression. Nangong Lai, who was under the influence of the forbidden technique, couldn't move. He could only shout behind him, Tisk, TSK, 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 you still pretend to be disgusted. In fact, you're so happy in your heart. So what if I am? Beligaju played with the bright petals with his fingers. There was a hint of evil in his eyes. If you're so capable, ask Qingzhan to give you a bunch of roses too. Nangong Lai was choked by his words and completely froze. After a while, he asked again, Ju, since you like it, why don't you tell her? I want to see what else she will give me next. Beligaju put the roses to the tip of his nose and sniffed. His smiling face was so handsome that it was almost intoxicating. Nangong Lai's mouth twitched. What kind of bad taste is this? Shameless. Too shameless. Chapter 410. Beligaju, on the other hand, was very happy. She didn't know how long it took. Only then did he pick her up and put her in his arms. He slowly stroked her back, so gentle that it was somewhat unbelievable. Hellion Weiwei was originally very lazy. It's just that she didn't know why. When he was clearly chasing after his wife, her entire body would become soft in the end. However, the side of his face wasn't affected in the slightest as he leisurely tidied up his sleeves. There wasn't a single wrinkle on his body. Hellion Vivian felt that she had a bit of a bad start the whole day. However, the whole school was talking about her actions of sending flowers to the shop. He-Eyes couldn't help but ask her out to talk. What exactly are you thinking? What do you mean, what am I thinking? Hellion Vivian yawned. He-Eyes raised his eyebrows. The things you did. Didn't you say you didn't like the palace and wanted to leave?
Oh, that.
Hellion Vivian retracted her slender fingers and smiled. I thought about it later. Even if I don't like it, I don't have to leave. I can also try to change my environment. He-Eyes. When you make this kind of decision, can you not be so hasty?
Oh, right.
Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up. The people who are participating in the consort selection this time, you should investigate their backgrounds. What do you want to do? He-Eyes raised his eyebrows vigilantly. Hellion Vivian shrugged and smiled faintly. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will win 100 battles. You're saying you're also participating in the selection? He eyes looked at her face and really couldn't bear to think about the results of the selection. He only said implicitly, I don't know about those people's backgrounds, but they're quite fair. He meant that you're so dark. Why are you joining in the fun? You'll be defeated in minutes. However, Hellion Vivian really just raised her eyebrows and said, oh, meaningfully. What He eyes wanted to know wasn't this, so he paused and said, what does this have to do with you sending the royal roses?
Can't you see?
Hellion Vivian was also confused. I'm chasing him. He eyes' face was full of shock. After being in the capital for so long, this was the first time he had seen a girl chase someone so swiftly and decisively. It's fine if you're chasing someone, but why are you giving her flowers? Hellion Vivian smiled mysteriously. You don't understand. He eyes. He really didn't understand. Was there a need for a girl to send flowers when she was chasing someone? Shouldn't it be the other way around? A boy giving a girl a present? I've read a lot of books in the past. My experience in chasing people is also from those books because it's very easy to find a way to match my identity. Hellion Vivian didn't find any problems at all. She rationally shared her thoughts with He eyes. For example, the arms tycoon fell in love with me. He eyes shamelessly asked, the munitions tycoon fell in love with me? What was that? Hellion Weiwei spent 20 minutes to roughly explain the entire book to Heizei. He eyes finally understood, but the corner of his mouth twitched. So, your position is that of a munitions tycoon? Of course. Hellion Vivian lifted her chin slightly. She wasn't just a munitions tycoon, she was also a domineering CEO. I've analyzed it. The way to do it is basically to either domineeringly possess the other party at first, or say, I only love you in the whole world. Send flowers first, then cook, and finally settle everything with a kiss. As long as the movement is big enough and the scene is eye-catching enough, it's very easy to chase the other party. Hiai's expression was slightly conflicted. Domineeringly possess the other party? That doesn't fit my style. Hellion Vivian was a little shy when she said this. I like to do it step by step. He eyes. Who asked you this? How do you think a girl like you can domineeringly possess the royal family? Tell me. So, I learned a little more. Hellion Vivian was serious in her work. Of course, she wouldn't only make one preparation when it came to chasing someone. I also read this book. As she spoke, she took out the book that she had hidden and handed it to He eyes. When I saw it, I was really happy, because it was the one that gave me the inspiration for the specific way to chase someone. He eyes looked at the book cover. The words 108 Ways to Chase Your Wife were written in black and white. Chase your wife.
Wife.
This is the inspiration it gave you, how to go on the path of courting death, right? You'd better not let the royal family see this book. He eyes chuckled twice. Hellion Vivian sighed deeply. Unfortunately, he already knows. He eyes. He actually didn't strangle you to death. Actually, I feel that what I did wasn't eye-catching enough. Hellion Vivian continued. He eyes already didn't know what expression to use to face her. He wailed in his heart. Trust me, you're eye-catching enough. Right now, the entire academy is talking about you sending flowers to His Highness. Even the teacher in class fainted because of you. What else do you want? I thought of a good idea. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and suddenly smiled evilly. I need your cooperation. He eyes covered his face. I don't want to be beaten to death by the royal family. Last time, he even threatened me that if I saw you again, he would directly bestow a marriage upon me. Don't worry. This time, we're doing something big and grand. He won't care. Hellion Vivian raised the corners of her eyes with a unique laziness and slyness. He eyes was about to cry. What kind of sister did he actually acknowledge? It was night. The sky gradually turned dark. In the midst of the clouds, a man in white stood under a vine and coughed heavily twice. Master, are you all right? The little one carried a gourd and tugged at the man's clothes. Her face was full of worry. Master, what's wrong? The man in white smiled faintly. Nothing. Are you unhappy because she sent flowers to someone else today? The little one bit her lips. Master, why don't you tell her that you've been looking for her for so long? For her, you even went to the underworld. You even made your body become like this, but she doesn't know anything. The man in white reached out and stroked the little one's head. I'll tell her. I'll tell her when she really wakes up. But the previous array has been broken. We have to set up a new one. The little one's eyes darkened. The night wind swept across the green dragon lake, stirring up another layer of ripples. The man in white grunted. His voice was a little cold, and he was a little absent-minded. The little one knew that he still hadn't forgotten what he saw today. She lowered her little hand and obediently followed him into the bustling commercial compound. Chapter 411. The next day. In the imperial court, the civil and military officials were a little nervous compared to usual. It was not because of anything else but because the royal family, who had never appeared in the morning court, actually came. He did not stand, but leaned lazily on the carved wooden chair at the side. He raised his eyebrows and looked at them. All of you want me to take in a secondary consort? The old officials who were kneeling down had their own plans. Now that Emperor Morong had fallen, it meant that the fifth prince had lost his power. If they could use the opportunity of the third prince's secondary consort selection to send their daughters into the palace, they could regain their footing and show the third prince that they were on his side. However, these officials did not think that Beligaju was not willing to take in this secondary consort at all. Lord Zhang. Beligaju slowly called out a name. When I was eradicating Morong's party some time ago, someone seemed to know Lord Zhang. Lord Zhang, shouldn't you explain how the two of you met and then mention the secondary consort selection? Lord Zhang shuddered and knelt on the ground with a thud. He shouted with a pale face, Your Highness, please spare my life. Your Majesty, please spare my life. Beligaju did not even look at him. Not to mention the emperor, who ignored the imperial court all day long. In the purple-golden imperial palace, no one dared to speak. However, even if Beligaju was unwilling, he had reached the age limit. As long as he was the crown prince, once he reached the age limit, he would have to choose a capable woman to accompany him. The previous emperors did not have a situation like Beligaju's because when they chose their consort, they would choose the most outstanding woman. However, Beligaju chose a faceless woman who could not even light up a crystal ball. This was not acceptable at all. Moreover, there were outstanding women like Yun Biluo and Helian Jiaoer in the capital city. This would cause a lot of dissatisfaction among the people. Even though this Helian Weiwei isn't as useless as before, but that face of hers is really very unsightly. How could third prince tolerate her? I reckon it's because she's from the Helian bloodline. Don't forget how many heroic contributions old Master Helian made back then. Forget it. She's already been chased out of the general's residence. It's hard to say if she can recognize a new ancestor. I heard that the second miss of the Helian family stayed in the temple for 2 days. Because she felt guilty, she recited some Buddhist scriptures. How should I put it? I think she's quite pitiful. It's Madame Su who did something wrong, not her. Sacrificing herself to save her daughter's reputation was a ruthless move by Su Yanmo. In the past few days after returning to the capital, as long as she went out, she would be pointed at and talked about. She hated Helian Vivian from the bottom of her heart. She hated her so much that the roots of her teeth were itching. If it wasn't for that little bastard, she didn't need to suffer such humiliation. Moreover, Su Yanmo clearly knew that before the secondary consort selection, reputation was very important to the selected ladies. That was why she did what she did. For so many days, the Su family had started to restrain her because she had used too much previously. Murong Guangyao was nowhere to be seen all day long. She knew that he felt that she had embarrassed him by parading around, so he didn't even want to be close to her. Su Yanmo was the only one who knew how tough her life had been recently. However, it was worth being happy that before the appearance evaluation, Jiao Er's reputation had finally improved. Jiao Er. Su Yanmo stood beside the sedan chair and waved at the Helian Jiao. She took the white handkerchief in her hand and wanted to wipe the sweat on her forehead. The Hellion Jiaoer turned her head and hurriedly glanced at the few ladies who were walking with her just now. She then pulled Su Yanmo aside and asked, "Mother, why are you here? I saw that you didn't go home, so I was worried about you." Su Yanmo was stunned for a moment before she replied, "What's wrong?" The Hellion Jiaoer looked up and twisted the white handkerchief with her fingers. "They were just fooling around with me like they used to when you appeared. Mother, you should go home first. It's very difficult for me to stand here." Su Yanmo glanced at the few silhouettes standing behind her. They were all wealthy people in the circle. She smiled and said, "Mother understands. Mother will go back now. Have fun, have fun." The crowd watched as Su Yanmo left and then came closer. "Jiaoer, that was your mother. She looked like a very kind person. Why did she?" The Hellion Jiaoer heard, and her eyes immediately turned red. "No matter what she did wrong, she was still my mother. She didn't have any bad intentions at that time. Forget it, forget it. It's all in the past." One after another, the young ladies of each family gathered around and comforted Hellion Jiaoer. "With a face like yours, it's hard to avoid attracting jealousy. Some older sisters perhaps they just can't bear to see their younger sister doing well. That's why they created so many problems." The more the Hellion Jiaoer listened, the more pitiful she pretended to be. "I don't blame my sister. If it were me, I would be very angry too. It's just that my sister seemed unwilling to forgive me and my mother this time. No matter how much we said, it didn't help. I've always wanted to apologize to her sincerely. Jiaoer, not everyone is as kind as you. Think about it carefully. The consort selection is just around the corner. With her looks, she can't bear to see anyone prettier than her. That's why she refused to forgive you. She wanted to affect your reputation so that you can't participate in the selection." That person curled her lips and looked disdainful. Someone echoed, "That's right. I also think that the third princess consort is simply jealous. She can't grow up, so she's harming others. She won't even let go of someone as beautiful as Sister Yun. She's simply vicious. Let's not talk about her. It's getting late. Let's hurry and participate in the appearance evaluation. It'll be too late if we're late." The Hellion Jiaoer nodded. Her actions were natural and unrestrained. The first step of the secondary consort selection was the appearance evaluation. This evaluation was completely confidential. Everyone's name was hidden, and only their serial number and name were left. This was to ensure that the evaluation results were absolutely fair. The Hellion Jiaoer looked at the score written on the rice paper after the evaluation of her face. Her thin lips curled into a smile, and there was a deep sense of satisfaction hidden in her eyes. "Hellion Vivian, so what if you're powerful? You can only watch as the royal family chooses a secondary consort."
Ha.
"Who asked you to have such a dark and ugly face? Not to mention the end of the selection. You can't even pass the first round of the appearance evaluation." The Hellion Jiaoer laughed. Just as she was about to tidy up her hair and walk out, she saw the door of another room being slowly pushed open. A pair of slender, white legs appeared in front of the Hellion Jiaoer. Chapter 412. The Hellion Jiaoer could clearly hear the gasps coming from all around. Looking at the woman walking towards her, she subconsciously clenched her fists. How could it be her? That village girl from the red light district. Perhaps it was because the noise was too loud, the people around them also looked in their direction. In the afterglow of the setting sun, a woman in a bright red robe was holding an umbrella inlaid with black feathers. Only her face was exposed. She had a pair of languid eyes, and her skin was as white as snow. Her long, curly chestnut-colored hair was no longer bound by a wooden hairpin and was casually draped behind her back, giving people the illusion that she was extremely clean. The people standing beside the Hellion Jiaoer were already a bit dumbfounded and asked blankly, "Who is this?" "How would I know?" The Hellion Jiaoer bit her lip and clenched her fists even tighter. She didn't expect that person to be qualified to participate in the appearance evaluation. The people nearby glanced at the Hellion Jiaoer and said, "Jiao Air, your tone is very strange."
Sorry.
The Hellion Jiaoer rubbed her head and said, "I'm probably a bit tired. My body hasn't been very good recently." That person nodded in understanding, but his eyes did not leave the woman who was walking away. "Beautiful, really beautiful. That skin is so white that it's almost transparent. She looks just like a fairy." Yes. The Hellion Jiaoer did not mean what she said. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the more she looked at that village girl, the more familiar she felt. It was not the kind of familiarity that she had seen once or twice, but the familiarity that came from being by her side all year round. Forget it, this was not the main point. The main point was how to find a way to get rid of this woman who came from the red light district. Just as Hellion Jiaoer was lost in her thoughts, someone on the other side shouted in surprise, "The results of the facial appraisal are out. Everyone quickly go and take a look to find your own ranking." The ladies were very excited, but they more or less knew where they would be ranked. Someone said, "Jiaoer is here, so we definitely don't expect to get first place." "Sister, you're making fun of me again." Hellion Jiaoer seemed to be shy and blushed. "There's also Sister Yun. Sister Yun came here this morning for a test, but I don't know what her serial number is." All right, I'll stop messing with you. But you and Jade Fall are the only two who look outstanding in the capital. Either way, the first place will be between the two of you." That person pulled Hellion Jiaoer and wanted to go over. Hellion Jiaoer also had a sweet smile on her face. For the time being, she put the matter of seeing that village girl to the back of her mind. However, when she saw the serial number on the list, the smile on her face froze. She wasn't the only one. Even the person who had just pulled her over glanced at the number in her hand in disbelief and compared it to the announcement list on the wall. How could this be? Jiao Air is only third. That's strange. Who's the second place? The crowd habitually ignored the serial number of the first place because they had already determined that the first place was Yun Biluo. They began to anxiously look for the corresponding serial number of the second person. Number 5? Who's number 5? No one answered. The ladies frowned one after another. They were very puzzled by the sudden appearance of the second place. Someone whispered, "Why don't you ask who's number 11? What's there to ask? It's definitely Sister Yun. I'll look for her when I return to the academy and tell her this good news." Hellion Jiaoer could no longer hear what the people around her were saying. All her attention was on the announcement list, as if she had fallen into a pool of ice water. Third place? How could she only be third place? Could it be because of that village girl who had just walked out? Hellion Jiaoer gripped the handkerchief in her hand tightly. She didn't want to be so ruthless. She was the dignified daughter of the general's residence. Why should she be oppressed by a bitch who came out of nowhere?
Just wait and see.
She must find out who this person is, and then ruthlessly slash her face. Hellion Jiaoer's heart was filled with sinister thoughts. She turned her body sideways and instructed the mammy that Madame Su had found for her. She wanted the mammy to privately find the person in charge of this appearance appraisal. She wanted to first revoke the qualifications of that village girl before anything else. However, this time, it was not as easy as Hellion Jiaoer thought. The nanny returned and shook her head at her. Hellion Jiaoer did not expect that there would be a day when her identity would not work. Even money was not useful? What's going on? The nanny looked around and said, the person in charge did not even accept the money. He looked very scared, and his face was pale. Hellion Jiaoer snorted coldly. It's probably a new person who has not done this before. I'll talk to him directly later. Yes. The nanny bowed her head respectfully. It was easy for Hellion Jiaoer to find Lord Liao, who was in charge of the overall appearance appraisal. When Lord Liao saw Hellion Jiaoer, his eyes were fixed on her, and the light in his eyes circled her body. Hellion Jiaoer usually did not want to interact with official Liao. He was obviously the same age as her father, but every time he saw her, he would always look at her with that very uncomfortable gaze. Jiaoer, come here. Tell Uncle Liao what's going on. Official Liao reached out and pulled Helian Jiaoer over, letting her sit on the wooden chair next to him. If it was before, Helian Jiaoer would definitely ignore him. But now, Helian Jiaoer also knew the current situation of the general's residence. If she wanted to succeed, she naturally had to learn to soften her attitude. "Uncle Liao, I want you to do something for me." Helian Jiaoer softened her voice, a bit like she was acting coquettishly. When the man with the surname Liao heard this, his whole body went limp. He took the opportunity to pour water for Helian Jiaoer and placed his hand on the little hand that he had been yearning for day and night. "What is it?" "Not to mention one thing, Uncle will do 10 things for you." Helian Jiaoer was not a young girl who did not know anything. In the past, in order to drive a wedge between Helian Vivian and Murong Changfeng, she deliberately learned those things between men and women. She had a dream that night, as if she had secretly eaten the forbidden fruit. Now that Official Liao touched her hand like this, she did not know why her whole body felt a little hot. When Official Liao saw that she did not refuse, he became bolder and put his hand on her thigh. He breathed out a thick breath and approached her. "Our Jiaoer is really becoming more and more beautiful. The more you grow, the more seductive you are. Your skin is also so good." Helian Jiaoer did not push him away. Instead, she softly said, "And..." When Official Liao saw this, his eyes lit up. He directly hugged her and kissed her lips. His voice was rough. Chapter 413. Helian Jiaoer wouldn't really do anything to him. She just wanted to let him have a taste of the sweetness and whispered in his ear. Lord Liao quickly agreed. "Don't worry, the person you mentioned, I will definitely not let her be selected." "That's good." Helian Jiaoer pushed his shoulder and said softly, "I will thank Uncle Liao when the time comes." How could Lord Liao be willing to let her go? He hugged her from behind and caressed her with his big hands. "Stay a little longer. Uncle Liao will personally send you back later." Helian Jiaoer's legs were soft after being caressed. She pushed and pushed, and the two of them returned to the wooden chair. Although the servants outside couldn't hear clearly what the people inside said, they could still hear the ambiguous sounds. The guards looked at each other and sneered in their hearts. They really didn't expect these ladies to be like this in private. Lord Liao's child was already so old, not to mention that there was a tigress in his family. As Helian Weiwei listened to the mercenary's report, the corners of her mouth curled into a sinister smile and said, "Continue to follow her, then send this invitation to the Liao residence. Tell Madame Liao that I will give her a big gift on the day of the selection tomorrow." "Yes." The mercenary looked at Helian Vivian and was somewhat stunned. If he didn't see it with his own eyes, he would never associate this fairy-like person in front of him with his own young master. Helian Weiwei, on the other hand, didn't feel anything. Holding the umbrella in her hand, her thin lips curled into a smile, faintly raised, White Academy. Beligaju, who had just returned after the morning court, untied his cloak with his slender fingers and said, "Go and wake the princess up." In his impression, Helian Weiwei's ability to laze around in bed was to the extent that it could infuriate both men and gods. Without anyone calling her, she could lie on the desk in the inner hall for an entire day, not to mention that she was given a bed to sleep on. Qing Zhan said uncomfortably, "Your Highness, the princess, you are looking for me?" The unique freshness in the woman's voice was particularly pleasant to the ears in this morning, but it made the listeners feel particularly puzzled. Beligaju looked at the woman in a loose robe who had put away her umbrella. His eyes narrowed as he beckoned with his slender fingers. "Come here." Helian Vivian was currently at the most important stage of getting a wife. Those overbearing CEOs would show up in front of their wives from time to time when they were trying to get a wife. Helian Vivian also wanted this effect. She walked towards Beligaju with a smile. Beligaju lowered his eyes and looked at her for a long time. His fingers traced the traces on her face. "Where did you go?" In fact, he wanted to ask, why did she get up so early today? "Oh, I went out to do something." Hellion Vivian said casually with a smile in the corner of her eyes. What's more, the morning is the best time of the day. Of course, we can't waste such a good time. Qingzhan was listening at the side. Her expression was a little conflicted, because everyone knew that the princess was a person who didn't care about her life when she slept. Now she said something like, the morning is the best time of the day. Sure enough, since the day the princess came back with a book, 108 Ways to Get a Wife, she had never been normal. There was no expression on Bailey Jiaju's face, but his pair of eyes deepened. He looked at Hellion Weiwei with a gaze full of deep meaning. Follow me back to the palace in a moment. Okay? Hellion Weiwei's yawning hand paused. That face had long returned to its usual dark and gloomy state, faintly carrying a smiling expression. Those people in the palace probably still don't know that I'm pursuing a certain highness. I'll give them a heads up first. However, in fact, there was no heads up that Hellion Vivian needed to do. Since Baligaju cleared out all the shadow guards last time, he didn't even see a palace maid when he returned to the palace this time, let alone a female death attendant. Therefore, the people who served Hellion Weiwei were all old mamas. When they were treating the new princess consort, they were all respectful and reverent, without the slightest mistake. All of a sudden, Hellion Weiwei felt that her thoughts were of no use. She sat at the dining table and sighed slightly. Why did she always feel that the domineering that she prepared was useless when it came to a certain someone? What happened to a lot of maids in the bedroom? There was none. How could she find an excuse to cabinet someone? How could she show her evil charm without cabinet? Baligaju saw that from the moment she entered the bedroom, she began to look for something with an evil smile. In the end, she looked a little listless. He directly picked up a piece of vegetable and said in a faint voice, as if he was raising prey, "Don't be in a daze when you eat." Hellion Vivian opened her mouth and took a bite. She ate elegantly. While she was being fed, she muttered in her heart. She kept feeling that something was not right. Those girls in the books shouldn't behave like this, right? They even care about what the president eats? It didn't seem like it. However, His Highness was different. He liked to feed her, and he would also set who she met. Forget it, who asked her to be a domineering president now. It was only right for her to be considerate of her other half. Hellion Vivian ate until her cheeks were slightly puffed. His Highness was really a tormenting little demon. Then she put all her energy into the food. Nangong Lai was stunned by the interaction between the two. After a while, he found his voice. Ju, even if you're being polite, you should let me win. I haven't eaten lunch yet. The royal, who was interrupted by the feeding, said in a cold voice, Why are you here? I've always been here. Nangong Lai's voice rose. It's because the two of you went back and forth too frequently. You didn't even look to the side. Also, does Hellion Vivian not have hands? Does she need you to feed her? Hellion Vivian certainly noticed Nangong Lai's gaze, especially this one. She didn't have any other thoughts when it came to this playboy. If she could beat him up, she would beat him up. Thus, in the next second, Nangong Lai felt dizzy and lay on the ground. What just happened? Hellion Vivian nimbly retracted her left leg that only used a little bit of strength. Her thin lips curved. Wei. Baligaju frowned disapprovingly. His noble and handsome face turned to the side. Nangong Lai was in tears. Ju, you finally remembered that I'm your brother. Hellion Vivian looked back and raised the corner of her eyes at him, waiting for him to continue. In the future, when you eat, don't fight and kill. It's not good for your stomach. Baligaju reached out and pulled her over. Sit down and continue eating. You ate too little just now. Nangong Lai, who was knocked to the ground, was dumbfounded. What the hell? Ju. I was beaten up. Didn't you see? Where exactly is your focus? Chapter 414. Hellion Vivian didn't want to beat him too much. Beating him a little would be enough. After listening to Beligaju's words, she sat back in her original place and continued to accept a certain highness feeding. Bailey Jiaju, on the other hand, casually placed one hand on the back of the chair behind her, while the other hand casually picked up vegetables. Although there was no particularly intimate action, one could feel the tacit understanding between the two. Nangon Lai simply couldn't believe that these two people could be so unscrupulous. Not only were they loving each other, but they were also so unbridled in front of him. Was this the rhythm of torturing a single person to death? After another half an incense's time, Beligaju finally put down the bamboo chopsticks in his hand. He took the handkerchief handed over by the eunuch and wiped his hands. He said to Hellion Vivian, "Drink another bowl of soup in a while. It's boiled with red dates. It's good for your body." Hellion Vivian nodded obediently. "If you can't finish it, just leave it. Don't stuff it." She continued to nod obediently. Seeing that she was so cooperative, Beligaju was very satisfied. He patted the furry head in front of him. "If you really want to go out, let Eunuch's son take you. If there's anything, let him inform me in time. Don't go too far."
Okay.
Hellion Vivian took his hand and drank a mouthful of tea. After getting a positive answer, Beligaju stood up slowly and tidied up his sleeves. He was ready to take Nangon Lai, who was already crying piteously for food, to teach those restless ministers a lesson. After taking 2 steps, he felt that it was inappropriate, so he stopped and stood up straight. "If anyone provokes you, there's no need for Eunuch's son to report. Just beat them back. Don't be bullied." Hearing this, Nangon Lai felt a lot of pressure. Miss Hellion could even beat him, the prodigy priest, without hesitation. She could kick him down with 1 foot. Who could bully her? It's good that she doesn't beat others, okay? But why does Aju's way of speaking sound so familiar? Yes, I remember. Back then, he had taught little Seven the same way. That was why he had raised a little tiger that no one dared to provoke. Hellion Vivian felt that at this time, she had to fully show her thoughtfulness as an overbearing president. She smiled at Beligaju and said, "Don't worry, I won't let others bully me. If they go too far, I will definitely fight back." Nangon Lai. Why did he have a feeling that the Imperial Palace would not be peaceful in the future? And wait a minute, why did she not seem to care about Aju choosing a secondary consort? It was impossible for her not to know that the capital was in such a great uproar. Well, it was not like this woman to be so silent. It would be more convincing if she beat up all the beauties who came to pick the concubine. But it was so calm now. It shouldn't be like this.
What do you want to say to me?
Beligaju glanced at Nangon Lai, who was still in a daze in the study. Nangon Lai gently coughed. "I've figured it out." Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows and signaled him to continue. "Actually, this kind of thing has happened before. After all, she is the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. It's not strange that she is the one who possessed the body." Nangon Lai looked at him and said, "The main thing is that she said she came from 1,000 years in the future. This is a bit strange. Have you asked her what the War Dragon Empire is like 1,000 years in the future?" Beligaju's voice was faint. "Her world is a bit different from now. That's the key point." Nangon Lai's eyes darkened. If she was just the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, she would not have chosen the Demon Cultivator. You know, the Phoenix Girl and the Demon Cultivator are opposite. I think something must have gone wrong when she was reincarnated. That's why this happened. Speaking up to this point, he paused for a moment, then continued, "But Aju, there is one thing you must pay attention to. This is something you have never taken to heart, and that is the arrival of the Phoenix Girl will bring about a huge change to you. You must properly handle the matter between the two of you, otherwise it is very likely to change the entire situation of the War Dragon Empire." Beligaju did not speak. He rubbed his chin with his fingers. No one knew what he was thinking. Nangon Lai looked at his face. In his mind, various methods used by men before began to appear. After thinking for a while, he opened his mouth and said, "Actually, this Hellion Vivian is pretty good. Although she was more in line with your aesthetic standards in the past, naive and pure, and was scared of you to death when she was young. You were very interested in her. But no matter what, she is now the third princess consort. You better not go too far. I was interested in her when I was young? Beligage sneered. Why didn't I know? Nangong Lai smiled evilly. Did you forget? But it's normal for you to forget. I just remembered it recently. At that time, I also just met you. When you saw Hellion Vivian, your face was not very good. My face was not good, because I was interested in hers. Beligage sat back and casually crossed his two slender legs. Nangong Lai raised his eyebrows. Is it not? If you are not interested in someone, you won't even look at her. He was a pervert since childhood. The more you like something, the more you want to bully it. As if he saw through Nangong Lai's thoughts, Beligage absent-mindedly looked at him. Do you think I will be interested in a girl who is scared of me to the point that her face is pale? At that time, I was still a child. I was not so perverted. If I don't like someone, I will usually show it. Then, according to what you mean, you don't like the previous Hellion Vivian? It was the first time that Nangong Lai heard him say that he didn't like someone. Then he laughed. Are you keeping Hellion Vivian by your side now to take revenge on her for being scared of you before? No wonder you were so interested in her when you first saw her. Beligage listened to his words and said in a faint voice, I don't have time to take revenge. He knew very well who made him want to destroy the person every time he saw her. Perhaps it was like what Lai said. The more he liked something, the more he wanted to crush it. No, he couldn't have this thought again. That woman, he wanted to let her stay by his side forever like this. Even if it was unscrupulous. Perhaps when he killed people in the future, he should hide it from her. He didn't want her to know about his unknown side. That kind of cruelty, cunning, killing people like flies, and even taking pleasure in destruction. If possible, he never wanted her to know. After coming out of the study, Beligage went back. Hellion Vivian was already asleep. In order to get enough energy, she didn't go anywhere. She lay quietly on the bed. She was so well-behaved that it was not like her usual self. Chapter 415. She was still wearing the pure black collar that he had given her. Her long chestnut hair was spread out on the bed. The side of her face was so clean that even the fine hairs on it could be seen. Beligage looked at her peaceful sleeping face and couldn't resist bending down to kiss her lips. Eunuch Sun stayed in the palace all year round and naturally knew that the scenery on the other side of the screen wasn't something that servants like them could see. He only walked over and waited on the side. Under normal circumstances, Beligage would know that he had something to report. Come in. An indifferent and emotionless voice came from behind the screen. When Eunuch Sun came in, Beligage was still sitting on the bed. Seeing him come in, he didn't get up. Instead, he reached out to touch Hellion Wei's forehead. He lowered his voice and asked, What's the matter? Looking at Beligage's hand, Eunuch Sun withdrew his gaze. He knew that His Highness didn't want to wake Wang Fei up, so he lowered his voice as much as possible and said, These are the memorials that have been submitted by the ministers in the past 2 days. The Emperor's expression has been very ugly these past 2 days. I'm afraid that he won't be able to read these memorials. The retired Emperor had this servant deliver them to your Highness to read. Beligage's voice was indifferent as he grunted, Put them down. You can leave. Eunuch Sun acknowledged and respectfully took the memorials from the little eunuch's hands. He placed them on the carved sandalwood table at the side. He paused and said, Your Highness, the retired Emperor wants to invite Wang Fei over for a family dinner. Should this servant prepare now or wait until Wang Fei wakes up? She's not a picky eater. Prepare the soup as usual. Beligage pinched Hellion Vivian's fingers, looking extremely satisfied. Eunuch Sun obeyed and ordered people to prepare. When he walked out of the bedroom, he couldn't help but look back, only to see that the two figures behind the screen were so compatible that it made others envious. Beligage was holding Hellion Vivian in his arms with extreme gentleness, and the person in his arms didn't wake up at all. Instead, She buried her head in Beligaju's neck, lazily like a sleepy cat, noble and sleepy. Eunuch Sun was stunned for a moment before he frowned. His Highness had never been so kind to anyone before. He was worried about this, and that was why he was worried. His Highness had never agreed to participate in the selection of the secondary consort. Although the ministers did not dare to provoke His Highness, there were more and more voices behind his backs. Even if the retired emperor didn't want to break up the couple, he would talk to the princess about the selection of the secondary consort. He really didn't know what His Highness would do at that time. Thinking of this, Eunuch Sun shook his head, raised his eyes, and glanced at the screen. Hellion Vivian was in a daze. She put her head on Beligaju's shoulder and moved back and forth, as if she wanted to get up. She said sleepily, "Well, what time is it?" "It's still early. Sleep a little more," as Beligaju said. He freed one hand and gently put it on Hellion Vivian's forehead. Only then did Hellion Wei Wei feel comfortable. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Beligaju held her with one hand and patted her back with his fingers. His other hand picked up the memorial that had just been presented. His side profile, which was always indifferent and cold, looked more gentle at this time. Seeing this scene, Eunuch Sun didn't say anything. He walked out of the bedroom with the eunuchs, serving on both sides. The Highness he knew was ruthless and thoughtful. He had always been domineering and liked to kill people without leaving a trace of blood. It was this kind of person who seemed to have given away all the patience he had in his life, just now. Eunuch Sun was undoubtedly happy. Because since he was a child, the Highness he saw was a slightly gloomy person. It was a little strange to describe a little boy with the word gloomy. But Eunuch Sun had never forgotten the scene when he saw Beligaju for the first time. At that time His Highness was still young. He looked noble and delicate. When people saw him, they couldn't help but wonder how there could be such a beautiful child in the world. However, such a child could stand in the imperial garden and watch the two palace maids being drowned in the lake. He was calm and even had a slightly evil smile. At that time, Eunuch Sun was afraid of this little master. After so many years, Eunuch Sun finally knew why he became like that. An unfavored prince, and bearing the name of the Nemesis, never lived a good life in the palace. Now everyone was fighting to be His Highness's concubine. A long time ago, every time those daughters of officials came to the palace, they would hide far away from His Highness. Some of the sons of officials close to the Empress would even talk about him behind his back. Invisible isolation was the most terrible thing. So His Highness didn't talk much, because he didn't have any friends. Even his biological mother didn't like him very much. Every night, he would pick up a bowl and eat by himself. However, he gradually became more and more ruthless. Perhaps the former Empress was right. Beligaju was a person with ruthlessness in his bones. The retired emperor had felt guilty for so many years because he owed His Highness. But he was most afraid that His Highness would really fall into the devil's path one day. Now with the princess by His Highness's side, he obviously felt that the cold martial chi had softened, but how to solve the problem of selecting the secondary concubine was really a problem. As the retired emperor's right-hand man, Eunuch Sun had to tell Hellion Vivian something before the banquet so that it would be easier to talk about it during the meal. Hellion Vivian got hungry easily. Before Beligaju went to the study to deal with official business, he had the habit of asking people to prepare pastries in the bedroom. After Hellion Wei Wei woke up, the first thing she saw was a plate of colorful pastries, then a cup of Longjing tea that left a lingering fragrance on her lips and teeth. Only then did she tilt her head to listen to Eunuch Sun's earnest and well-meaning advice. At first, she was a little interested. Later, she picked up a piece of peach pastry and stuffed it in Eunuch Sun's mouth. She smiled faintly. The selection of the secondary concubine will start tomorrow. Why are you panicking, Eunuch Sun? He panicked? He was completely anxious for her. Eunuch Sun scolded the maid in his heart. He looked at Hellion Vivian with some shock in his eyes. Why was the princess so relaxed? The selection of the secondary concubine is going to start soon. After Eunuch's son swallowed the peach pastry in his mouth, he said, "The results of the appearance evaluation are out. I heard that the first place is Miss Yun, who was recommended by the 4 great families. The retired emperor doesn't like this girl, but he can't say anything now."
Sigh. I'm so worried.
Compared to Eunuch's son's gloomy face, Helian Weiwei was obviously much calmer. However, she still raised her eyebrows playfully and asked, "You said that Yun Biluo got first place in the appearance evaluation?" Chapter 416. She was still wearing the pure black collar that he had given her. Her long chestnut hair was spread out on the bed. The side of her face was so clean that even the fine hairs on it could be seen. Beligaju looked at her peaceful sleeping face and couldn't resist bending down to kiss her lips. Eunuch's son stayed in the palace all year round and naturally knew that the scenery on the other side of the screen wasn't something that servants like them could see. He only walked over and waited on the side. Under normal circumstances, Beligaju would know that he had something to report. "Come in." An indifferent and emotionless voice came from behind the screen. When Eunuch's son came in, Beligaju was still sitting on the bed. Seeing him come in, he didn't get up. Instead, he reached out to touch Helian Wei's forehead. He lowered his voice and asked, "What's the matter?" Looking at Beligaju's hand, Eunuch's son withdrew his gaze. He knew that His Highness didn't want to wake Wang Fei up, so he lowered his voice as much as possible and said, "These are the memorials that have been submitted by the ministers in the past 2 days. The Emperor's expression has been very ugly these past 2 days. I'm afraid that he won't be able to read these memorials. The retired Emperor had this servant deliver them to Your Highness to read." Beligaju's voice was indifferent as he grunted, "Put them down. You can leave." Eunuch's son acknowledged and respectfully took the memorials from the little eunuch's hands. He placed them on the carved sandalwood table at the side. He paused and said, "Your Highness, the retired emperor wants to invite Wang Fei over for a family dinner. Should this servant prepare now or wait until Wang Fei wakes up?"
She's not a picky eater.
"Prepare the soup as usual." Beligaju pinched Helian Vivian's fingers, looking extremely satisfied. Eunuch's son obeyed and ordered people to prepare. When he walked out of the bedroom, he couldn't help but look back, only to see that the 2 figures behind the screen were so compatible that it made others envious. Beligaju was holding Helian Vivian in his arms with extreme gentleness, and the person in his arms didn't wake up at all. Instead, she buried her head in Beligaju's neck, lazily like a sleepy cat, noble and sleepy. Eunuch's son was stunned for a moment before he frowned. His Highness had never been so kind to anyone before. He was worried about this, and that was why he was worried. His Highness had never agreed to participate in the selection of the secondary consort. Although the ministers did not dare to provoke His Highness, there were more and more voices behind his back. Even if the retired emperor didn't want to break up the couple, he would talk to the princess about the selection of the secondary consort. He really didn't know what His Highness would do at that time. Thinking of this, Eunuch's son shook his head, looked up at the screen again, and glanced at it. Helian Vivian was in a daze. She put her head on Beligaju's shoulder and moved back and forth, as if she wanted to get up. She said in a daze, "Well, what time is it?" "It's still early. Sleep a little more," as Beligaju said. He freed one hand and gently put it on Helian Vivian's forehead. Only then did Helian Weiwei feel comfortable. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Beligaju held her with one hand and patted her back with his fingers. The other hand picked up the memorial that had just been presented. His side profile, which had always been indifferent, looked more gentle at this time. Seeing this scene, Eunuch's son didn't say anything. He walked out of the bedroom with the eunuchs, serving on both sides. The prince he knew was ruthless and thoughtful. He had always been able to do whatever he wanted and liked to kill people without leaving a trace of blood. It was this kind of person who seemed to have given away all the patience he had in his life just now. Eunuch's son was undoubtedly happy. Because since he was a child, The Royal Highness he saw was a slightly gloomy person. It was a little strange to use the word gloomy to describe a little boy. But Eunuch Sun had never forgotten the scene when he saw Beligaju for the first time. At that time, His Highness was still young. He looked noble and delicate. When people saw him, they couldn't help but wonder how there could be such a beautiful child in the world. However, such a child could stand in the imperial garden and watch the two palace maids being drowned in the lake. He was calm and even had a slightly evil smile. At that time, Eunuch Sun was afraid of this little master. After so many years, Eunuch Sun finally knew why he became like that. An unfavored prince and bearing the name of the Nemesis never lived a good life in the palace. Now everyone was fighting to be His Highness's concubine. A long time ago, every time those daughters of officials came to the palace, they would hide far away from His Highness. Some sons of officials who were close to the Empress would even talk about him behind his back. Invisible isolation was the most terrible thing. So His Highness didn't talk much, because he didn't have any friends. Even his biological mother didn't like him very much. Every night, he would take a bowl and eat by himself. However, he gradually became more and more ruthless. Perhaps the former Empress was right. Beligaju was a person with ruthlessness in his bones. The retired emperor had felt guilty for so many years because he owed His Highness. But he was most afraid that His Highness would really fall into the devil's path one day. Now with the princess by His Highness's side, he obviously felt that the cold martial chi had softened, but how to solve the problem of selecting the secondary concubine was really a problem. As the retired emperor's right-hand man, Eunuch Sun had to tell Hellion Vivian something before the banquet, so that they could talk about it during the meal. Hellion Vivian got hungry easily. Before Beligaju went to the study to deal with business, he had the habit of asking people to prepare pastries in the bedroom. After Hellion Weiwei woke up, the first thing she saw was a plate of colorful pastries, then a cup of Longjing tea that left a lingering fragrance on her lips and teeth. Only then did she tilt her head to listen to Eunuch Sun's earnest and well-meaning advice. At first, she was a little interested. Later, she picked up a piece of peach pastry and stuffed it in Eunuch Sun's mouth. Then she smiled faintly. The selection of the secondary concubine will start tomorrow. Why are you panicking, Eunuch Sun? He panicked? He was completely anxious for her. Eunuch Sun scolded the maid in his heart. He looked at Hellion Vivian with some shock in his eyes. Why was the princess so relaxed? The selection of the secondary concubine is going to start soon. Eunuch Sun swallowed the peach pastry in his mouth and said, "The results of the appearance appraisal are out. I heard that the first one is Miss Yun, who was recommended by the 4 great families. The retired emperor doesn't like this girl, but he can't say anything now."
Sigh. I'm so worried.
Compared to Eunuch Sun's frown, Hellion Weiwei was obviously much calmer. However, she still raised her eyebrows playfully. You said that Yun Biluo was the one who got first place in the appearance evaluation? Chapter 417. If it wasn't her, who else could it be? Eunuch Sun sighed again. His face was very worried. Hellion Vivian held the osmanthus cake in her mouth. She used her left hand to point at the bridge of her nose with her slender index finger. Me? You?
Buffed.
This time, Hellion Weiwei made Eunuch Sun laugh. He coughed heavily and said, "Princess Consort, you're making fun of me again." Hellion Weiwei saw that he did not believe her, so she did not say much. She just curled her lips and smiled. Then, she sat cross-legged on the cage bed that was made with expensive gold. She held a box of desserts in her arms and slowly ate the desserts one by one. When she tasted the apricot cake, she felt that it tasted good, so she kept a few more for Bailey Jiaju, thinking that he could eat some if he was hungry later. Eunuch Sun couldn't understand what she was thinking. In the long years that followed, he had been silently worried about Hellion Vivian's future. First of all, she was a young lady with no power. If His Highness no longer liked her, She was very likely to die in this palace. He had been so worried. Until not long after, she regained the Hellion clan. Beligaju used the blood of countless people to remove all the obstacles between the two of them. At that time, Eunuch Sun understood that every step along the way, Beligaju was paving the way for Hellion Vivian. So that even if she stood on a high place and waved her sword to her heart's content, she didn't have to worry about falling. Because he always stood in a position where she could take a step back, using the most ruthless method to get rid of all her worries in an unknown corner. Hellion Vivian saw that Eunuch Sun was still in a daze. After eating the snacks, she began to fiddle with the armament parts. She liked these things. In modern times, she would feel uncomfortable sleeping if she didn't put a few submachine guns under her bed. Now, in this bedroom, except for the wall of ancient books that couldn't be turned over, which belonged to Beligaju, the rest of the things, such as guns, swords, etc., were all hers. Not to mention those sparkling and shiny armament components scattered all over the floor. Therefore, when Beligaju was busy, she would curl up on the bed, nimbly developing new armaments, never taking a single step out of her bedroom. In fact, our mercenary queen was a homebody. If he could sit, he would definitely not stand. If he could lie down, he would definitely not sit. She would only leave her beloved red wine, guns, and luxurious bed when she went out to fight. Now in the palace, although there was no red wine to drink, it was still very comfortable to play. He didn't know if Beligaju had given any orders. Ever since she moved to the palace, no one had dared to look for her. Sigh, as a well-mannered and domineering CEO, she was also very distressed that her other half was so capable. In reality, the royal family was currently sitting in the imperial study, dealing with the ministers who had come to ask for the armament. It's just an armament. Why would Lord Hongwon exchange it? It doesn't need to go through Wei Wei's hands. Someone will deliver the armament to your residence tonight. Lord Hong was very old and was one of the ministers by the retired emperor's side. His words carried some weight. Now that he heard Beligaju's words, he smiled with satisfaction and happily went home to wait. After Beligaju finished dealing with this matter, he stood up from the carved wooden chair that he had been busy with the whole day. He stretched out his hand to loosen his collar and said to Shadow, who was standing at the side, "In a while, go pick up an armament that the Princess Consort doesn't want and have someone send it to the Hong family's old residence." "Yes." Shadow silently lowered his head. He really couldn't bear to let these people know that the armament that they wanted to buy at a high price was just a defective toy that the Princess Consort didn't want. That's right, it was a toy. It couldn't even be counted as an armament. But His Highness had this kind of ability. A pile of scrap metal could be sold at a sky-high price. It was such a pity that he didn't go into business. Beligaju looked at the color of the sky outside and flipped through the few memorials. Feeling that it was about time, he simply had someone send the rest of the memorials back to the emperor. After that, he walked towards the sleeping quarters. Hellion Vivian saw that he had returned and immediately took out the delicacies that she had prepared to share with him. "Eat a piece of apricot cake." After saying that, she moved the box in front of Beligaju. The imperial family's tea brewing skills were better than anyone else's. The tea brewed by him was indeed more fragrant than usual. His white hand held the porcelain cup. After seeing her movements, his long eyebrows raised. "Feed it to me." Hellion Vivian saw that he couldn't free his hands and didn't refuse. She directly sent the apricot cake to Beligaju's mouth. Only, she didn't know if it was intentional or not, but when he was eating the cake, the tip of his tongue gently swept across her finger. Hellion Vivian suddenly felt an electric shock. The cake in her hand almost fell to the ground. "Why are you so careless?" He reached out and supported her. His eyes looked at her deeply. "Hold it steady." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. When she saw his smile that wasn't a smile, she only felt that it was bad. Without thinking, she tiptoed and kissed him. Beligaju seemed to have never expected that she would do this. The evil smile on his mouth stiffened, and his body paused for half a second. Then, he pulled her whole body over and kissed her like a blooming datura flower, emitting a seductive smell. From the beginning to the end, Bailey Jiaju was a man that people were willing to indulge in. If he wanted to, his gentleness could almost drown people to death. Hellion Vivian was gently kissed behind her ear, and her body trembled. His hand didn't have the slightest intention of stopping. It slid down Hellion Vivian's clothes and went all the way down. Hellion Vivian suddenly trembled. Her eyes widened, and she subconsciously wanted to struggle, but her hand was pressed down by him. Baligaju hugged her from behind and coaxed her in a deep voice, "Don't move. Be good." Waves of numbness passed from the man's slender fingers to Hellion Vivian's limbs. Hellion Vivian was sweating. She was like a fish out of water. She bit her lips hard. Although it was very comfortable, it was very embarrassing. She couldn't help but hug the person who was abusing her and wanted to beg Baligaju to let her go. Baligaju looked at Hellion Vivian's red lips and frowned. He gently scolded, "Let go. If you break it, call out if you feel comfortable. There are only two of us here." Hellion Vivian still didn't speak. The red color on her face was especially beautiful. Bailey Jiaju's eyes suddenly darkened as he looked at her. He pulled her into his arms and pressed against her softness through the cotton-padded clothes. "You will definitely feel more comfortable like this, right?" As he spoke, he pushed her up. Hellion Weiwei's face reddened by another layer. She couldn't say anything embarrassing and could only gasp for breath. Chapter 418. Baligaju was not in a hurry. He rubbed her over and over again. Finally, he heard the answer he wanted, but he could not control himself. Remembering that someone else was coming in, he restrained himself. He hugged Hellion Vivian in his arms and calmed his breathing. He just hugged her. He did not do anything. But there was something else. She kissed him again, the corner of her mouth slightly curved. Baligaju whispered in her ear, "Don't provoke me." Hellion Vivian smiled, with a hint of devilishness and laziness. She did not know if it was because couples who fell in love liked to be close to each other. She only knew that she liked the feeling of skin on skin. The kiss also happened naturally. The sweet taste of the tip of the tongue was very infatuating at this moment. Yun Biluo was chatting and laughing with the ladies who saw the announcement. "Sister Yun, you are so awesome. You got first place in such a short time." That's right. This appearance appraisal is not only for the people in the capital. I'm afraid the most beautiful person in the entire War Dragon Empire is Sister Yun. Yun Biluo listened to their words and smiled gently. She looked like a sickly beauty, delicate and lovable. It's just a coincidence. Jiao Er's appearance is not worse than mine. What's her ranking? Speaking of Jiao Er, it's really strange. Those people shook their heads. I don't know what happened. Suddenly, someone appeared and took Jiao Er's second place. Yun Biluo was also surprised. Someone is prettier than Jiao Er? What's her serial number? Number 5. Yun Biluo's hand that was holding the fan paused. What number did you say was second? Number 5. That person looked at Yun Biluo's suddenly pale face in confusion. Sister Yun, what's wrong with you? Are you feeling unwell again? Yun Biluo shook her head with a forced smile, but her hand was stronger. Number 5? She was number 5, which meant she was second. The first place in the appearance appraisal was someone else? How was this possible? Who was first? Yun Biluo flipped through her things in a place where no one could see. Her slender eyebrows furrowed. Later on, those people said something else. Yun Biluo could no longer listen. She had never expected such an outcome, because she really couldn't think of anyone in Beijing who could match her in terms of appearance. Who was that person? On the other hand, Hellion Jiaoer also felt a little gloomy because she couldn't find any information about that village girl. She didn't believe that she couldn't deal with a slut with no power and influence. Since she couldn't find out who she was now, she would wait until the selection of the secondary consort and defeat her on the spot. The first test was to test everyone's martial chi level. Maybe the other party was just a piece of trash who couldn't even light up a crystal ball. The purpose of the appearance evaluation was to select the first batch of candidates. Basically, only 10 people were selected. She believed that among these 10 people, No one was her match except for Yun Biluo. In addition, she had the help of the official in charge, Lord Liao. She didn't believe that she couldn't win this secondary consort. As long as she became the secondary consort, she would immediately let that little slut Hellion Vivian have a taste of the humiliation she had inflicted on her these days. An ugly woman with no qualifications dared to challenge her everywhere. She could even conquer a man who was 20 years older than her. Could that ugly woman? Just like what her mother had said, as a woman, whether she had martial chi or not was put aside, the most important thing was her face.
Ha!
Hellion Jiaoer laughed wantonly. She couldn't wait to see how ugly that little slut's face would be when she found out that she was the secondary consort. All right, stop looking for her. We'll talk about it when the time comes. That's right. It wouldn't be too late to make a move when she saw that village girl. After searching for a day, there was no news at all. It was a waste of energy. At night, the shadows of the trees swayed, and the lights were bright. The 9th palace, where the retired emperor lived, was the quietest palace in the palace. Now, Hellion Vivian and Beligaju were sitting opposite the retired emperor. The table was full of dishes, and it was a feast for the eyes. The retired emperor looked at Hellion Vivian. It was obvious that he had something to say. He hesitated for a while and finally said, Ju, since Wei Wei is here, I'll say it clearly. You must go to the secondary consort selection tomorrow. If you don't go, you should know what will happen. Your qualification to be the crown prince will be revoked. He didn't want to see his grandson, the only one who could inherit the War Dragon Empire, ruined because of such a thing. Therefore, the retired emperor mentioned the ancestral rule. Bailey Jiaju was still feeding her as before, but this time, he put down the bamboo chopsticks in his hand halfway through the meal. The light in his eyes faintly swept a glance at retired emperor as he said a few words, then cancel it. The retired emperor's face stiffened, and he was about to lose his temper. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows at this time and said in a clear voice, What if the secondary consort selection is held as usual? No one will revoke his qualification to be the crown prince, right? The retired emperor nodded and heaved a long sigh. Girl, can you agree to it? This cold guy must be afraid that you will feel wronged, so during this period of time, whoever mentions the selection of the secondary consort, he will make trouble for them. These 2 days, the whole morning court has been in a mess, and the ministers have a lot of opinions. Tell them to come to me if they have any opinions. Beligaju's tone was very indifferent, but there was a strong sense of hostility in the coldness. The retired emperor didn't want to see him lose control, but he had to do something to stop people from talking. Hellion Vivian glanced at the retired emperor and looked at Beligaju. Then, she reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. I want to talk to my father. Emperor father is going to have a good talk. Don't interrupt. Hearing this, Beligaju raised his lower lip and the corners of his mouth curved into a playful smile. This little girl dared to order him?
Ha!
Very well, he wanted to hear what she wanted to say. Imperial grandfather. Hellion Wei Wei chuckled as she met retired emperor's eyes. Selecting a secondary consort is fine, but I've heard that the reason why we want to select a secondary consort is because of the rules passed down by our ancestors. When the heir apparent reaches adulthood, he must find a girl who is extremely beautiful no matter in terms of martial chi or appearance to assist the heir apparent. Only then can we guarantee the prosperity and power of our Dragon War Empire. Since you want to find a more perfect woman, it should be okay if I participate in the secondary consort selection, right? The retired emperor was stunned and said, No problem, but he didn't forget that the reason why the secondary consort selection was held was because her face was too dark. Now this girl said that she wanted to participate in the secondary consort selection. Chapter 419. But your face. The retired emperor, who was used to giving orders, hesitated. He was satisfied with his granddaughter-in-law, Hellion Vivian, from the bottom of his heart. But the imperial family was the imperial family after all. There were many things to consider, and Wei Wei's face was the key. Hellion Vivian knew what the retired emperor meant. She smiled gently. Imperial grandfather, don't worry. I will solve it myself. The retired emperor wanted to ask her how she was going to solve it. This person couldn't suddenly become white. But if Wei Wei was really chosen, she wouldn't be too bad. Then he would have an excuse to stop Ju from choosing this side consort. Okay. The retired emperor smiled. Go ahead and participate. Grandfather will help you. Even if you can't get the first place, Grandfather will let you enter the top 5. As long as you enter the top 5, everything will be fine. But you must be prepared to dress up. Hellion Vivian nodded. I know. The retired emperor always admired her calmness. He ordered Eunuch Sun, give all the information about the side consort selection to Wei Wei later. Yes. After Eunuch Sun acknowledged the order, he glanced at Hellion Wei Wei again. The astonishment in his heart had yet to subside. Logically speaking, the princess consort's current appearance should not be exposed in front of everyone. She was so ugly and disgraceful. Once it was announced, it was bound to attract even more dissatisfaction. Because those people would wonder why such an ugly woman could become the third princess consort. On the contrary, they didn't get chosen because they had everything they wanted. In the past, he didn't understand that there were so many women in the world. Why did His Highness only like this person? Now that he saw so much, he finally understood. Although there were many women in the world, Hellion Vivian was the only one who approached His Highness without any purpose. Even he, who had been with His Highness all year round, would feel the horror of being with a monarch was like being with a tiger because of His Highness's viciousness from time to time. But this didn't seem to exist for Hellion Vivian. She just treated His Highness as a man, an ordinary man that she liked. Ever since Wang Fei entered the palace, His Highness had smiled more and more often. His doting towards Wang Fei was out of everyone's expectations. He had been in the palace for a long time and had seen many spoiled concubines. Once she was favored, she would become different from before. She would always beat and scold the palace maids and eunuchs under her. At this time, Hellion Vivian was only a teenage girl, but she gave people a sense of calmness in the face of change. Don't be fooled by the fact that she usually looked lazy and didn't do anything. Every movement of hers carried a sense of oppression. He was never arrogant and was even more courteous to old people like them. Such a woman was too suitable for the dark and gloomy palace. She was different from His Highness. His Highness was the kind of person that, no matter how holy and radiant he looked on the surface, he was cold to the bone. His eyes were so cold that he could fall at any time. On the other hand, Hellion Vivian clearly knew everything, but she couldn't feel any gloominess from her. She was brilliant, lazy, and tenacious, just like a warm light. Not only His Highness, but even the servants also liked to stay by Wang Fei's side. Thus, Eunuch Sun was really worried. He was even more anxious than Hellion Vivian, the person involved. He had to find a concubine with the best makeup skills to do Wang Fei's makeup. And clothes? Yes, that's right. He had a lot of connections in his hands, so it wasn't a problem to find a tailor. Most importantly, time was too tight. The secondary consort selection was tomorrow. God, why did he always have the feeling of marrying off his daughter? No, he had to make preparations. Thus, before the banquet ended, Eunuch Sun found an excuse to let someone else take the blame. Even when the Emperor Emeritus sent someone to find him, he only gave 2 words, I'm busy. The person who came was shocked. One had to know that Eunuch Sun was usually the most loyal person. Today, he actually dared to say, I'm busy, to the Emperor Emeritus? Of course, the person who reported wouldn't really tell the Emperor Emeritus these 2 words. He only said that Eunuch Sun couldn't get away and would come back when he was free. In the end, when the banquet ended, Eunuch Sun still didn't appear. Instead, he asked those little brats raised by him to use all their connections to find what Hellion Vivian would wear on the day of the consort selection. Looking at the priceless clothes one after another in front of his eyes, he felt that he was very cute when he was being serious. On the other hand, when Beligaju went out, the Emperor Emeritus deliberately called Hellion Vivian to the side and sighed deeply. Girl, grandfather made this decision. Don't blame grandfather. I won't. Hellion Vivian poured a cup of tea for him. I know the situation in the imperial court now. Grandfather, don't worry. I'm not someone who can be bullied by anyone. When the Emperor Emeritus heard what she said, the guilt in his heart deepened. I'm not good enough. Aju's father is even worse. Since he was young, if this child wasn't ruthless, he wouldn't have survived to this point. Someone once said that the descendants of the Bailey family are cold-blooded and heartless. Even if they have a noble status, they are just living dead. Those who were punished by him even cursed that he would never know how to and was destined to be lonely for life. So many years have passed, and he doesn't have a single person by his side. To be honest, I used to suspect that he liked men. Hellion Vivian really wanted to shake hands with the Emperor Emeritus. She also suspected so. Later, I found out that he wasn't interested in anyone. The Emperor Emeritus lowered his eyes. Deep regret was written on his face. It's lonely at the top. I sent him to that position too early, but I didn't take responsibility. Later, when I found out that he was rejected by his mother, everything was too late. In this palace, no one can be trusted. The other princes at least have their mothers who treat them wholeheartedly. It's fine if Ju has to guard against others, but he also has to guard against his mother. Later, when the Morome family entered the palace, his methods became colder and colder. He never thought about being with anyone. That girl was left to him by his mother. He treated that girl differently. I used to suspect that he would choose that girl as his concubine when he comes of age. Now, I found out that I was wrong. There are many things that can make him smile. But you're the first person who can make him so uneasy. You don't know how shocked I was when he told me that he would never choose a secondary consort because you would definitely run away. The Emperor Emeritus smiled at Hellion Vivian. Although I don't want to admit it, but as those people said, he is heartless and never cares about anything. Now, he finally has someone who he cares about. Even if this person becomes his weakness, grandfather is happy. Chapter 420. Hellion Weiwei quietly listened and didn't interrupt retired Emperor at all. She was just like a junior sitting by retired Emperor's side, slowly drinking the tea in her hand. She only smiled gently at the end of the conversation. Grandfather, don't worry. If that day really comes, I won't be his weakness. She had always wanted to be more than just a concubine in the harem. Since he liked her, of course, she would do her best. Hellion Vivian thought of this, and her voice became clearer. Whether it's a chess piece or the sword in his hand, I hope that when he sees the throne, he will think of me, Hellion Vivian. The retired emperor seemed to be shocked by her words. His eyes flickered, and he smiled with relief. No wonder Ju chose you. Hellion Vivian didn't think much of it. As a domineering president, wasn't it her duty to protect her beloved other half? When Beligaju came in, he saw the two of them talking. He raised his eyebrows. What are you talking about? Nothing. Hellion Vivian stretched. What did you do just now? Bailey Jiaju opened his mouth indifferently. Eunuch's son has some matters to attend to. Oh, since you have something to do, let's go back first. Hellion Vivian said as she stood up. Didn't an old man ask for martial arts from you? I can make 2 for him when I go back. No need. I've already ordered someone to send it. Beligaju reached out and picked up the cloak on the chair. His eyes met the retired emperor's. Hellion Vivian also looked at the retired emperor. Imperial grandfather will go first. Go. The retired emperor waved his hand. He looked like an ordinary old man. Hellion Vivian was still thinking about the retired emperor's words when she saw the slender and indifferent figure walking in front of her. She reached out and held his empty hand. Then, their fingers interlocked. Beligaju curved his thin lips and led Hellion Vivian into the bedroom, as if he was leading a child. Then, he rubbed her head and said, Sleep first if you're sleepy. You still want to go out? Hellion Vivian yawned. Beligaju nodded.
There's a small matter that needs to be dealt with.
Oh.
Hellion Vivian automatically followed. Beligaju looked back at her and said with a smile, "You don't have to go with me. What's the big deal? I want to eat the apricot cakes you prepared today. Pick out a few more pieces."
All right.
Hellion Vivian hugged her blanket and began to rummage through her snack box, leaving Beligaju to do his own thing. Bailey Jiaju smiled. After he put on an outer robe and walked into the night, the gentleness on his face disappeared in a flash. He ordered coldly, except for the Imperial Guards, "Call everyone in the palace to the study room." The accompanying palace servant hurriedly left. In a short while, a palace made of about 17 or 18 years old knelt on the steps outside the study. She was trembling as she was escorted by 2 guards. She was so scared that her face was as white as a sheet. Beligaju looked down at her and sneered. "Who gave you the courage to spread rumors about the princess consort, huh?" The palace maid had been in the palace for many years and knew Yun Biluo. She had always thought that since Miss Yun would participate in the secondary consort selection this time, there would be no need for a princess consort in the palace in the future. When the time came, it would be obvious that she would be favored. Therefore, she wanted to help Miss Yun in advance. Besides, everyone knew that the princess consort was ugly. She did not understand why His Highness was so angry. However, it was too late when she understood. Beligaju glanced at her indifferently. "Take her away." "Yes," and Ing approached and waited for Beligaju's instructions in a low voice. "Your Highness, the palace servants are here." Beligaju's tone was neither cold nor indifferent. He only said 2 simple words: "Put her to death." The palace maid obviously did not expect Beligaju to kill her directly, without asking. In a panic, she screamed at the top of her voice, "Your Highness, please spare my life. I'll tell you everything." "It's Yun." The palace maid was so scared that she struggled unconsciously. Ning knocked her head with the hilt of his sword. Blood spurted out. Bailey Jiaju laughed. That was a gloomy coldness that had never been shown in front of Hellion Weiwei. "Be careful with your movements. After you stuff his mouth, beat him slowly. It's fine as long as he dies within 2 hours. Move further away. Don't let the princess consort hear you." Yes, Ning took the order and retreated. He knew very well what His Highness meant. Anyone who dared to set their sights on the princess consort had to die. This was not the first batch. The last time the matter was dealt with at White Academy, they were all clear. The princess consort had been in the palace for such a long time. It was not that no one talked about it, but once it was found out, His Highness would not let them live until the next morning. Now, Ning finally understood that His Highness really cared about the princess consort. Beligaju turned and entered the inner room. Hellion Vivian was picking out the hard to find apricot cakes for him. Occasionally, she would take a sip of tea. Every time Beligaju looked at her puppy-like appearance, his heart would soften. Just looking at Hellion Vivian like this, it was as if the hostility in his body would naturally disappear. His prey was so obedient. Those who were not afraid of death and still gossiped behind her back. They deserved to be killed. However, he dealt with these people today not only because of this. The most important thing was that there was someone who wanted to leak his daily activities to her. When Bailey Jiaju thought of that possibility, his pair of eyes immediately emerged with a touch of shocking hostility. Hellion Vivian, who was aware of this hostility, held the snack box and looked up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Beligaju smiled. "I'm going to take a bath first. When Eunuch's son comes, let him find me in the bathroom." Hellion Vivian nodded. Looking at his back, she suddenly said, "Actually, I don't hate the smell of blood." Beligaju suddenly paused. His eyes darkened. "What smell of blood?"
I'm just used to taking a bath.
"Be good and wait for me to come back." He threw this sentence with a faint smile and left the bedroom. In the end, he was still discovered. It seems that in the future, when he makes a move, he should be further away. Eunuch's son happened to hear the conversation between the 2 people outside. He went forward and carefully tidied up Beligaju's robe. In a low voice, he advised, "If His Highness really likes the princess consort, he shouldn't spoil her like this. Since he's spoiling her, It's not good to let others know that the Princess Consort can make His Highness care so much. This may not be a good thing. Beligajah chuckled and slightly raised his head. His slender fingers untied his collar. With a smile, he said, "Then what does Eunuch's son think this highness should do?" Chapter 421. Since ancient times, other monarchs would find a scapegoat to block the spear for the woman they love. "Your Highness, why don't you?" Eunuch's son's words hadn't yet finished when he was interrupted by Bailey Jiaju's indifferent tone. His voice was as cold as usual. "That kind of stupid thing should be left to those who don't have the means to do it. I just want to let everyone in the world know that Hellion Wei Wei is mine. As for those who want to obstruct me, I'll kill them all." When Beligajah said the last words, Eunuch's son inexplicably shuddered. He turned back and looked lightly at Eunuch Sunday. "Do not let Wang Fei know of today's matter. This servant understands." Eunuch's son hurriedly lowered his eyes and didn't dare to speak more. When Beligajah finished bathing and entered the bedroom, Hellion Vivian was already asleep. She was lying on her side on the bed, made of pure gold. She was still holding the snack box. The inside was filled with almond cakes that had been divided. Bailey Jiaju stared at her for a while. Then, he bent down and hugged her in his arms as if he was hugging his favorite toy. "You're the only one in this world who can't betray me." Outside, the night grew darker. At this time, the harem girls of every family were preparing for the upcoming face election. After Wei Wei got up, she didn't choose the clothes that Eunuch's son handed over. While using peppermint water to rinse her mouth, she absent-mindedly said, "Yesterday, His Highness' mood wasn't too good. You should let those old people understand. I have some money here. Eunuch's son should be clear on who to give it to." Eunuch's son's hand that was arranging the clothes suddenly stopped. He raised his head and looked at Hellion Vivian, his eyes filled with shock. Wang Fei knew what happened last night. Hellion Vivian didn't know the specifics, but she could roughly guess. She smiled at Eunuch's son and said, "Your Highness isn't a bad person. Eunuch's son is a smart man and has been by His Highness' side for the longest time. I believe Eunuch's son understands His Highness better than I do. I won't say anything else. You can divide the silver as you see fit. Eunuch's son is a smart man and has been by His Highness' side for the longest time. I believe Eunuch's son understands His Highness better than I do. I won't say anything else. You can divide the silver as you see fit." If it were someone else, Eunuch's son would definitely push the money away. But now, he knew that Wang Fei was throwing money to restore His Highness' reputation. He had served 3 generations of emperors and empresses, but none of them would treat people like this girl. This way of doing things really made one's heart warm. She wondered how His Highness would feel when he found out. Eunuch's son smiled like a flower and immediately replied, "Yes." He then took the silver and went to the various palaces. When the old people saw the silver, not only did they feel relieved, they also called their disciples and grand-disciples over. Fang Yen said, "Whoever dares to say anything bad about His Highness and Wang Fei again, I'll break their legs." Eunuch's son listened with a smile. Toward the end, he remembered that they were going to select a secondary consort later. By the time they rushed back to the palace, Hellion Vivian had already washed up. She wore a long, fiery red dress that resembled a battle robe. The mermaid-like hem of the dress was parted, and her straight legs were vaguely exposed. She exuded the noble and graceful aura of a queen. In addition, her fair fingers were holding a pure black feathered umbrella. Every move of hers was refined and elegant, causing others to suddenly feel a sense of beauty as if she was waving her brush and splashing ink. Some people had great charisma. They weren't ostentatious or eye-catching. They were like snowflakes falling from the sky, cold and noble, silent, humble, and polite. Especially her pair of eyes, which were bright and clear. The smile on her lips was clean and gentle, and there was something different about her. Eunuch Sun thought in a daze that if it wasn't for Wang Fei's face, Wang Fei would be able to enter the top 5 based on her aura. However, he could only think about it secretly because Wang Fei's complexion completely denied everything. "Let's go," Hellion Vivian said with a smile. She put on her serial number and walked out of the bedroom first. Eunuch Sun followed behind her. His mind was filled with thoughts of how to cheat and make people focus on this girl's aura and ignore her appearance. Time passed very quickly. After it officially entered the middle of summer, it was hot everywhere. Therefore, the first test for the secondary consort selection outside the palace was specially chosen to be held early in the morning. Although it was early in the morning, there were still many people standing on tiptoes to look around. They wanted to see for themselves who was the most beautiful girl in the capital city. Hellion Jiaoer was the most excited, because even if she wasn't chosen as the secondary consort, Yun Biluo would enter the palace. By then, it would be a piece of cake for her to see Hellion Vivian make a fool of herself. Yun Biluo also came early. She was wearing a dress that was specially made at the royal cloth shop last time. It was a first-class long dress embroidered with ripples of peony. It was pure white and matched with a robe of the same color. Her long black hair was held up with an ancient hairpin, with a few strands of hair hanging down, complemented by transparent pearls. It made her look like a fairy who walked out of a painting. She was warm and gentle like water. Especially when she smiled, there was a faint shyness on her face. She had already charmed all the young masters. No wonder Sister Yun could get the first place. She's so beautiful. Someone praised. Yun Biluo smiled and pinched the person's face. "You're not bad yourself." However, the title of the first place always made her feel uncomfortable. Only she knew that she wasn't the first place in the appearance evaluation. However, she couldn't show any difference. She could only pretend now. When she really won the competition, no one would care if she was the first place in the appearance evaluation. Thinking of this, Yun Biluo smiled faintly. She coughed once in a while, which made her look even more delicate and beautiful. Hellion Jiaoer obviously didn't care about these things. She started looking for the woman who was holding an umbrella and wearing a red robe the moment she entered. However, after searching for a long time, she couldn't even find a figure wearing similar clothes. Hellion Jiaoer thought about it again. How could she forget? Since Lord Liao had agreed to this, he would definitely help her look for her. It was very likely that he found her now and used some tricks to prevent that woman from appearing here. Hellion Jiaoer thought about this, and the corner of her mouth lifted into a smile. She used to say that people shouldn't think too highly of themselves. She thought that she had some beauty and wanted to stand out in this kind of situation. What a fool's dream. She should take a look at her own status. Hellion Jiaoer ran her hands through her long hair. Without that stumbling block, her chances of winning would be higher. Soon, once the secondary consort selection was over, that ugly Hellion Vivian's good days would come to an end. Chapter 422. Not long after, there was a huge commotion at the entrance of the long street. The Hellion Jiaoer turned her head and saw a group of guards walking toward them. They made a path in the crowd in an orderly manner. The ceremonial equipment used by the royal family was originally luxurious. Among them, there was a dark black palanquin that took up all the elegance. Needless to say, everyone knew who was sitting in it. Some people could not help but guess that the royal family and the civil and military officials were here to select the most beautiful woman in the capital city. Perhaps they had been disgusted with Hellion Vivian's ugly face for a long time. This time, they had a good reason to select a pleasing woman to enter the palace. After all, a man like the third prince needed a beautiful woman to be a match for him, and he could go on a long journey. The Hellion Jiaoer thought so too, because they did not receive the notice of the return of the royal family from the beginning. Now that they saw them, they were naturally happy. No matter what the royal family did to her before, she did not care. Now, as long as she saw Hellion Vivian suffer, she felt happy. Perhaps what Yun Biluo said was true. On the surface, The third prince looked like he did not want to get close to Yunbiluo. In fact, it was only because he could not let go of what happened in the past. But deep down, he still cared about Yunbiluo. Otherwise, why did he show up in the secondary consort selection now? He must want to see Yunbiluo being selected. When the Hellion Jiaoer thought of this, she looked at Yunbiluo. She saw that she was looking at the third prince who was sitting in the palanquin with reddened eyes. She was even more certain that in this secondary consort selection, even if she did not win, Yunbiluo would win. Basically, it had nothing to do with others, however. What she did not expect was that the person who followed Beligaju out of the palanquin was the little bitch Hellion Vivian. Shouldn't she be hiding in the palace and not daring to show herself? Why did she come to join in the fun on such an occasion? The Hellion Jiaoer frowned in confusion. Then, she heard Eunuch Sun say in a loud and clear voice, "Since the last contestant is here, I announce the start of the first round of the competition." What does this mean? Hellion Jiaoer looked at Hellion Vivian and showed the first serial number in her hand to the staff member. That person looked like he had been struck by lightning. It was clearly inconceivable. He probably couldn't believe that such an ugly person like Hellion Vivian dared to participate in the selection. Was she here to be scolded? When Yunbiluo saw Hellion Vivian, a dark light flashed across her eyes. However, she did not show it on her face. She lowered her eyes and no one knew what she was thinking. Hellion Vivian's arrival caused an uproar. Some people felt that she was always creating miracles and their blood was boiling. However, most people still felt that it would be better for her to stay in the palace and save herself from humiliation. I heard that during the White Academy's assessment, she didn't even light up the crystal ball. I wonder if she can be a little more capable this time? That's not necessarily the case. She won the competition some time ago. However, she didn't emit martial qi at that time. It's hard to say this time. Silence, everyone. Lord Liao, who was dressed in his official uniform, stood up and gestured with his hand. From now on, you will enter the small door at the side according to your serial number. Those who lose will not have the chance to participate in the final round. In other words, in order to ensure the speed of the secondary consort selection, he wanted to eliminate the next batch and let the remaining few undergo the crystal ball test in front of everyone. There was no problem at first, but the Hellion Jiaoer suddenly realized that all the contestants with serial numbers were present. That meant that woman was here too? The strange thing was that she couldn't see her. The Hellion Jiaoer entered the first round of the test in confusion. No matter what, as long as she could let everyone know that Hellion Vivian was an ugly good-for-nothing, it was really a good thing. As there were many people in the test, no one knew which courtyard they entered. In the end, no one could tell what was going on. Someone said, "Do you still need to think? The third princess consort will definitely lose." Seeing that his master didn't speak, the little one with a gourd on his back turned his big round eyes and pointed at the judge's paper. Those who are eliminated will be marked with a heavy cross. Hellion Vivian's name is still there. Didn't you notice? They really didn't notice. Because in their minds, Hellion Weiwei would definitely not be able to pass the first round. That was something that was already set in stone. But who knew? Not only did Hellion Vivian not lose the first round, but her name was still on the list after the results of 3 rounds in a row. Why was this matter getting weirder and weirder the more they thought about it? Just as everyone was wondering what was going on, the finalists on the stage stood in a straight line in front of everyone. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw Hellion Vivian beside her, a trace of surprise flashed across her eyes. But this was good too. She was already at gold level 9, one more level away from the maximum level. No matter how powerful Hellion Vivian was, she was at most a water level. She clearly knew Hellion Vivian's tricks. During the previous competition, the gentleness she revealed was probably a water level. That was why she said that this was good too. Because of this, she would have a chance to viciously beat Hellion Vivian once in front of everyone. More importantly, although she didn't know Hellion Vivian's number. Looking at the list, it was obvious that she was behind Yunbiluo. Everyone knew that Yunbiluo's martial qi was unfathomable. It was very likely that she had reached gold level 10. If Hellion Vivian was tested behind such a person, the more obvious the contrast was, the more everyone would think that the little bitch was not good enough for the third prince. At that time, she and Yun Biluo would attack her from the front and back, which would show Hellion Vivian's incompetence. Sister, I didn't expect you to come. Hellion Jiao smiled at her. But don't worry, Sister Yun, and I will go easy on you. Don't you think so, Sister Yun? Yun Biluo was even more gentle and beautiful. She looked at Hellion Vivian with pity. As long as it can clear up the misunderstanding between me and Wei Wei, I'm willing to do anything. Wei Wei's gaze faintly swept over those two people. Someone as intelligent as her, how could she not know what the other party was planning? She curved her thin lips and didn't waste her energy on this kind of matter, like who tested first. To her, it didn't matter who tested first. Eunuch's son didn't want Hellion Vivian to be behind Yun Biluo. After all, Yun Biluo's martial qi was very abundant. If she was tested after her, it would be more embarrassing than usual. But now that the rules of the competition had been set, it couldn't be changed. Chapter 423. Eunuch's son could only watch anxiously as Yun Biluo walked up to the arena. She then took a step forward and placed her hand on the transparent crystal ball. In an instant, a bright orange-yellow light rose from the bottom of the crystal ball. It was shining brightly and was so pure that it was almost perfect. At that moment, the crowd surged. It's gold level 10. Oh my god. It's gold level 10. In the entire capital city, including the teachers in the White Academy, there are only a few who can reach level 10. This Miss Yun is really too amazing. She's more than amazing. Look at her face. I can't believe there's such a beauty in the capital city. This Miss Yun is definitely going to win. Yun Biluo looked at the influence she had created. Her lips curled into a bashful smile. She said to those people, "Thank you." She had mastered the technique of winning people's hearts. The next one was Hellion Vivian. The Hellion Jiao stood steadily at the side, waiting to see how Hellion Vivian would make a fool of herself. Hellion Vivian walked up the stairs calmly. Without any hesitation, she reached out her jade-like hand and placed it on the crystal ball. The Hellion Jiao smiled indifferently. She thought to herself that no matter how good she looked, she was just a little water rank. Why is there no movement after so long? Someone sneered. Could it be that she doesn't know how to inject martial qi into the crystal ball like the last time? Don't say that about her. After all, she's the third prince's woman. What are you worried about? She won't be the third prince's woman soon. She's so useless. She's destined to be divorced. The sarcastic remarks grew louder and louder. It sounded particularly harsh in the streets. However, Hellion Vivian did not care about the remarks around her. She seemed to be brewing something. Her slender fingers pressed on the crystal ball again, and she exerted all her strength. The crystal ball made a whoosh and fog rose from all directions. An unknown wind rushed in from all directions. It whistled and buzzed as it passed. The supervisor standing next to the crystal ball was uncontrollably affected. They subconsciously looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian, and a trace of disbelief flashed through their hearts. No, it shouldn't be possible. Princess Consort was so young, it was impossible for her to use so many attributes of martial qi at the same time. The north wind was howling in the arena. The people standing below the arena felt their cheeks hurt. It took them a lot of effort to see the changes in the crystal ball. Wait a minute. What was that? Gold? They had never seen such a pure and rich golden color before. Was this the 10th stage? No, that's not right. He was even more terrifying than a 10th Dan fighter. What was even more frightening was that after the golden color disappeared, the airflow in the crystal ball did not calm down. Instead, it turned into a rich brown color. That was the wood rank. How was that possible? Everyone knew that metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were originally 5 different elements. If they were fused together, it would be very easy for them to reject each other. If they did not cultivate well, they would definitely go crazy. That was why everyone wanted to level up step by step. But now, Hellion Vivian was actually wantonly controlling the colors in the crystal ball. Each color was bright to the extreme. Finally, the crystal ball turned into a multicolored light, lighting up everyone's eyes. Hellion Vivian stood there, one hand holding the crystal ball. Her long black hair moved with the wind. She was indescribably handsome. At the same time, everyone present, no matter if they were nobles or commoners, were all dumbfounded, because they all knew that there was no need to compete in the following crystal ball test. In this world, only the third prince had revealed 3 types of martial chi elements. No matter how powerful the others were, they were only at the nascent soul stage. It was too unexpected. The Hellion family's eldest daughter, who was called a good-for-nothing and a love-struck fool, was actually able to control all the elements of martial chi. And when those martial chi were in her hands, she casually played it like a game. After seeing the scene, Hellion Jiao Er's entire face turned pale. She firmly grasped both of her hands. Her pair of eyes swayed as she watched Wei Wei walk down from the stage. She couldn't wait to check if there was any problem with that crystal ball. Eunuch Su was also stunned. His mouth was wide open as he glanced at Beligaju, who was still sitting lazily, with a cold expression. Seeing that his own master did not have a surprised expression, then he figured out what was going on. Everything about the princess consort, his master should have known. Otherwise, he would not have agreed to the selection of a secondary consort. Eunuch Sun's mood changed from apprehension to excitement. He looked on excitedly. Since the previous crystal ball test had never had such a situation, the evaluators were also a little dumbfounded. However, very quickly, they suppressed the shock in their hearts and announced the next contestant's name absent-mindedly. However, everyone knew in their hearts that there was no need to compete in this test at all. Unless Hellion Jiao could also ignite all 5 elements in the crystal ball, perhaps she still had a chance to win. However, the next result was not the slightest bit of suspense. Hellion Jiao's complacent gold level 9 was simply not enough compared to the 5-colored crystal ball. Hellion Vivian seemed to always be like this. Every time, she would refresh their understanding of her. What kind of good-for-nothing was she? This was simply a once-in-a-decade, no, a once-in-a-century genius. Now, I announce that the third princess consort is the winner. Eunuch Sun finished his words. Beligaju, who was sitting at the side, stood up. There seemed to be a smile in his eyes, but that kind of smile made people feel cold from the heart. His hand intentionally or unintentionally turned his pinky ring, and his voice was clear and noble. Aning, have you remembered what I asked you to remember? Aning lowered his eyes. Yes. Then read it to them so that they can understand why I cut off their tongues. Beligaju said it casually. However, as Aning said the names one by one, those who were gossiping about Hellion Vivian just now all knelt on the ground, their clothes soaked in cold sweat. They had never expected such a result. In their hearts, the third prince should have wanted to replace Hellion Vivian long ago. Why did he stand up for her like this? Could it be that the previous rumors were all false? Once they thought of this possibility, those people's faces seemed to have lost all color. They were so pale that it was frightening. Take her away. It was just 3 words, but it made people feel an unprecedented murderous intent. Yun Biluo's eyes were shaking as she watched this scene. Her hands were clenched subtly. When she faced the crowd's gaze, her eyes were a little red, but there was still a smile at the corner of her mouth, as if she was complaining about her grievances. The bystanders did not dare to criticize Hellion Vivian, but some of the ladies who were close to Yun Biluo still lowered their voices and whispered in her ear, "Sister Yun, don't be sad. No matter how strong you are, if your appearance is bad, it's useless." Chapter 424. This person was right. No matter how well one won in the cultivation test, as long as one's appearance was not good enough, Everything else would be useless. Now, Hellion Vivian's biggest weakness was her appearance. There was nothing wrong with her facial features. It was just that her face was too dark and there were freckles on her face. It was really difficult for her to appear elegant. With such a face, how could she win against Yun Biluo, who is known as a gentle beauty? Sister Yun, you have to look at the bright side. Everyone knows that you're the winner of the appearance evaluation. There's no doubt that you'll win the next round, and some people will definitely be kicked out of the competition. The person spoke in a soft voice that no one else could hear, except for Yun Biluo's ears. However, Yun Biluo knew how to behave. She smiled gently. Other than me, there are many sisters who are great beauties, such as you, Sister Lan. Besides, she still did not know who was the first in the appearance test. Besides what? Yun Biluo coughed weakly, which made people feel more tender. Nothing. I just feel that no matter how beautiful I am, I can't get into His Highness's eyes. Sister Yun, don't say that. Since His Highness is here, it proves that he has you in his heart. Yun Biluo smiled through her tears. She looked so innocent, really? Of course it's true. The person glanced at Hellion Vivian as she spoke. After the crystal ball test, there were only 5 people left. Hellion Vivian, Yun Biluo, Hellion Jiaoer, and so on. These 5 people would enter the next round of the appearance test. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that if a swan was used as an analogy, then Hellion Vivian would be the ugly duckling that was the most uncoordinated among the 5 people. However, she was standing in the first position. When people saw her, they only remembered her dark skin. They did not even pay much attention to her facial features. Everyone was impressed by the third prince's taste. He actually chose such an ugly Wu Yan as his consort. Even Lord Liao, who was in charge of the secondary consort selection this time, didn't understand. He turned his head and said loudly, "Now, the second round of the beauty competition begins. After the appearance competition, you can show your serial number and see if it is the same as the one you were appraising. Ladies, please step forward and stand according to the requirements." As soon as his voice fell, the 5 of them walked up to the high ring together. As the champion of the first round, Hellion Vivian was placed in the first position without any suspense. Every beauty has a base score of 50 points. Points will be added from the base score of 50 points. The one with the highest score will be the winner. This time, 3 people will be eliminated. The remaining 2 will be based on the overall score. The winner will become the third prince's concubine. As Lord Liao spoke, he looked at the commoners and officials who were selected to grade at the last minute. These 10 people were personally selected by Eunuch Sun just now. They have nothing to do with the shortlisted beauties. Everything is based on their true feelings. There is no possibility of cheating. As usual, we will grade according to the ranking order. First, we will grade Miss Lan, who was ranked 5th in the previous round. In an instant, everyone set their eyes on Miss Lan. Her score was not bad, but it was far worse than Yun Biluo, who came later. The third was Hellion Jiaoer. Hellion Jiaoer's appearance was also very gentle. In addition to the temperament that she deliberately cultivated since young, it added a lot of points to her. Even so, she did not win against Yun Biluo. Every one of those people gave Yun Biluo a high score. The lowest score was 97 points, not to mention those who gave 100 points. The scene was in an uproar. Many people cheered for Yun Biluo's high score, as if the appearance competition was over. It didn't matter whether Hellion Vivian's score was given or not, because everyone who could see clearly knew that with Hellion Vivian's looks, she could only be ranked last. Lord Liao coughed softly. Silence, silence. I asked the judges to give marks for Princess Consort's appearance. Hellion Jiaoer smiled at this moment. It's finally coming. What a bitch. So, what if she won the cultivation test? In the end, she would still be inferior to them. Serves her right. Hellion Jiaoer finally felt a little better. She looked at Hellion Vivian with a gloating gaze. Yun Biluo's voice was soft. Wei Wei, why don't we not let them grade? I'm afraid it will hurt you. On the surface, this sentence sounded like it was for Hellion Vivian's good. In fact, it was implying that Hellion Vivian was the one who made a fool of herself. Sister Yun, just let Sister grade. Since we've come this far, she should give it a try. Once she hears everyone's score, she won't have any regrets. Hellion Jiaoer continued Yun Biluo's words hypocritically. However, Hellion Wei Wei merely glanced at her with a faint smile. Then, she said to Lord Liao calmly, "Before giving the score, I would like to wash my face so that the judges can take a good look before giving the score." Lord Liao was thinking that her face was naturally dark. What's the use of washing it? However, he ordered someone to bring a wooden basin filled with clean water. He didn't want to offend the third prince because of such a thing. Although he was on the side of the 4 influential families, he would try his best not to offend the third prince. However, he really didn't understand why the princess consort wanted to wash her face at this time. The rest of the people also didn't understand why Hellion Vivian suddenly made such a request. Even the second young master of the He family, who always understood her, frowned.
He didn't know what was going on.
Only the man in white, who was standing in the crowd, paused for a moment while stroking the little one. When he raised his eyes again, his ink-like gaze fell on Hellion Wei Wei, as if it was about to overflow with a faint light. Hellion Wei Wei stood there, not paying attention to the small commotion around her because of her request. She flipped her left hand nimbly, and a few fresh red strawberries magically appeared in her palm out of thin air. Yuan Ming smiled evilly while Whitey looked noble and cold. Both of them understood what Hellion Vivian was going to do. Naturally, there was a playful look in their eyes. She casually crushed the strawberry juice in the wooden basin where no one could see. Then, she gently scooped up the water with both hands and splashed it on her face little by little. Dear readers, please see if you can refresh the page for a new chapter. Then, the author's fever hasn't subsided, so I won't be able to update for the next 2 days. After the fever subsides, I'll update for everyone. Then, please pat my head and good night. Chapter 4:25. As she washed, it was as if some black water was flowing down her face. Her jade-like fair skin slowly bloomed in front of everyone. What is going on? Could it be that the black stuff on the princess consort's face can be washed away? Everyone looked at that fair skin in disbelief. Before they could see Hellion Vivian's entire face, they had already stood up in shock. However, even under such burning gazes, Hellion Vivian's actions were still unhurried. After she finished washing, she wiped her face with a white handkerchief. With a slight movement of her fingers, the umbrella embedded with black feathers appeared in her jade-like hands. Then, she slowly raised her eyes. Her skin was like snow, her eyes were like stars, and the mole under the corner of her eye fluttered, sparkling with a little luster in an instant. All the noise stopped. Like a lotus emerging from the mud, the bright moon rising. Everyone's eyes widened to the maximum. Looking at the person in front of them who was obviously beyond redemption, their eyes were filled with speechless shock. That lustrous white skin seemed to be shining, that flower-like oval face was sparkling like jade, and that languid smile at the corner of her mouth, it was simply breathtaking. Especially when she walked over with the black feather-folded umbrella, her sleeves, which were embroidered with silver thread, would float in the air. Below the robe, there was a small opening that followed the slender curve, giving people a kind of languid temptation. As she walked, the beautiful lines of her calves were faintly discernible, revealing her beautiful ankles. Just like that, she walked over to the judges' table. Her pupils were deeper than the others, the color was pure black, as if there was nothing in it, as if it could suck people in. Enchanting, gorgeous, languid. It was simply like a mandala flower that bloomed in the dark world, full of temptation and shapeless. Everything was silent to the extreme. Hellion Jiaoer's face was pale as she took a big step back. How is this possible? Hellion Vivian, how could she be that person? Impossible. This is impossible. No one paid attention to Hellion Jiaoer's reaction because everyone was collectively speechless. Everyone was stunned, including Eunuch's son and young Master He. They had imagined that if Hellion Vivian turned white, she would be very beautiful. But what he didn't expect was that she would be so beautiful. She was as beautiful as a goddess descending to the mortal world, making people's hearts beat faster. Especially the kind of temperament she had, gentle like jade, lazy and enchanting. Not to mention men wanting to marry such a woman. Even women would like her. He eyes pinched his thigh and felt pain. Then, he turned around and asked the steward beside him in an overbearing manner, "Is that really my little sister? Your big boss?" The steward replied calmly, "Boss has used his real face several times, but the second young master was not there. You can obviously make a living with your face. Why did he have to rely on marshalchi before? No, this won't do. I have to think carefully about how to protect my little sister in the future as a qualified adopted brother. Before, when I saw how safe she looked, I never considered this problem." He eyes turned his head and continued to stare at Hellion Vivian. The manager was speechless. This kind of thing should be handled by the royal family. Why are you, a Siscon, blindly joining in the fun? However, looking at the royal family's expression, they don't seem to be particularly happy. Fire Chilin, who had peeked into the steward's heart, smiled evilly and ran over to ask Beligaju, "Master, how are you feeling now?" It didn't forget what Master did when he first saw his mistress's real face. He painted her face even darker. It was obviously a tyrannical possessiveness at work, but he was so black-bellied that he didn't let anyone know.
Now he.
Just when everyone was petrified, Beligaju casually glanced at Fire Chilin, who was nestled by his feet, and raised his lips with a faint smile. "You really want to know how I feel? What the fuck?" It appeared. A devilish smile. Fire Chilin's scalp went numb. Not really, if Master wants to say." Beligaju's lips overflowed with obvious evilness. "How I feel? Very simple. During this period of time, I have neglected to discipline you and fed you too little." Fire Chilin, can you not talk about such a perverted thing so casually, hey? It regretted asking about his mood. It clearly knew that Master would be unhappy, so it was simply asking for it to be tortured. After Beligaju said this, he turned his gaze back to the petrified people and slightly clenched his fingers. The feeling of having one's most precious thing being peeked at by someone else was really a little unpleasant. When he returned to the palace, he should think of a way to make her compensate. Beligaju played with the thumb ring in his hand, and the corners of his mouth slowly curled up. This was only fair, wasn't it? Hellion Vivian still didn't know what His Highness was thinking. She looked at the people who maintained the same expression and reminded them, "Judges, you can give your marks now." Only then did the judges wake up from a dream and blink their eyes. Then their minds started to turn slowly, and only then did they remember what they had to do then. They started to give marks crazily. The people who were watching from the periphery also gradually regained their senses. Someone muttered, "Why do I find the third princess consort so familiar?" "Now that you mention it.
Ah.
I remember now. Didn't a fairy appear in the capital city some time ago? Isn't that the fairy the third princess consort? I didn't even think about it. Full marks. The third princess consort must get full marks." The atmosphere at the scene was getting more and more heated. In order to prevent the crowd from surging, the soldiers hurriedly maintained order. When Yun Biluo saw the scene, the gentle smile at the corner of her mouth froze. She originally thought that Hellion Vivian would definitely lose when it came to looks, so she didn't pay much attention to the martial chi test before.
But now,
the person who was about to lose was actually her. Deep in her heart, she didn't take Hellion Vivian seriously. It was all because of Hellion Vivian's face. In the end, she found out that this person had been pretending to be weak all along and had hidden a good hand of cards. The more Yun Biluo thought about it, the tighter she clenched her fists under her long sleeves. Her master had given her an order to successfully return to His Highness' side. If she lost today, how could she go back? Unless, right at this moment, a sudden burst of excitement interrupted Yun Biluo's thoughts. "Oh my God, It's really 1,000 marks. Everyone gave the princess consort full marks. That's great. Haha, only a blind person can't see the beauty of the boss. Boss? Why did you call the princess consort boss? Chapter 426. Don't you know? In White Academy, there is already a large group of people who recognize Princess Consort as their boss. Among them, there are many people from aristocratic families. At first, they also thought that Princess Consort was a love-struck trash, a dandy to the extreme. But after getting to know her more, they found out that she was not like what the rumors said. Although she was usually not easy to get close to, every time she spoke, she would hit the nail on the head. But she would not have malice towards people. As long as people did not talk about her, she would not find trouble with anyone and would only lie on the desk and sleep. Not only that, in the past, people always laughed at her for wanting to hug people's thighs and rely on flattering masters to get to the top. In fact, she herself was the founder of Profound Heavens. She made a good armament and just entered the academy. She achieved results that no one else had ever achieved. Under her leadership, the students of the inferior compound broke the cycle of nearly 100 years and won the first place. Also, just before the secondary consort selection, she even summoned the ancient mythological beast, Azure Dragon, in the academy. Even if she did not have this face, Boss is the most handsome in our hearts. Of course, if she had this face, then it would be even more perfect. Hearing this, people looked at each other in dismay. Other than shock, there was only shock. So the truth is like this? It has always been like this, just that Boss does not like to talk about it outside. That person had already become Hellion Vivian's loyal fan and would speak up for Hellion Vivian everywhere. Not because of anything else, but because among so many people, Hellion Vivian was the first to come from a famous family but never looked down on these small officials from remote places. Unlike those young ladies from aristocratic families, when in front of people, they bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind. They could not wait to worship Buddha and pray for the world, but behind people, they would bully and exclude them. But their boss would not. She would give them a few words of advice and let them take the next step further. Of course, those who misunderstood Boss would only hate her more and more. But those who were really Boss, no matter what happened, would always stand by her side. This was the so-called charm of personality. He believed that in the near future, when people mentioned Hellion Vivian, they would not use harsh words to humiliate her. Because one day, everything would be exposed under the sun, and the truth would be revealed. As for where Boss would go in the end, following her would make people feel like worshipping her. Qingzhan was standing not far away. She did not know why, but she suddenly remembered what Hellion Vivian said to her. Then, she looked at that beautiful and flawless face. She thought that she was beginning to see the world that Wang Fei had described to her. Freedom, equality, warmth, and amazement. This time, those ministers should be convinced of their loss. Eunuch Sun listened to the discussion below and laughed happily. Originally, the reason why retired Emperor sent Eunuch Sun here was to let him represent him to support Hellion Vivian. Who would have thought that Hellion Vivian didn't need anyone to back her up to win, and she even won to the extreme. Official Liao had just recovered from his shock. While he was shocked by the result, he coughed uncomfortably and then said, "I announce the result of the appearance competition. Wang Fei is first." At the same time, the other 3 people in the competition, including Hellion Jiao, were jealous and unconvinced when they heard the result. The young lady with the surname Lan from before pretended to be puzzled and said, "It's really strange." Previously, during the appearance appraisal, the result was clearly older sister Yun's first place. Why is it now? Princess Consort, I don't mean anything else. I just feel that it's probably because everyone's sense of beauty is different. Suddenly seeing older sister Yun lose, I feel somewhat puzzled. When Hellion Jiao heard this sentence, the dim light in her eyes brightened up again. How could she forget about the matter of appearance evaluation? However, Yun Biluo's expression became unnatural. She wanted to stop it, but it was too late. This was because Helian Weiwei had already opened her mouth. Her voice was flat, with a unique elegance. Lord Liao hasn't announced everyone's serial number yet. How can Miss Lan be so sure that Miss Yun is the first? After all, the lady with the surname Lan did not think too much about it. When she was asked by Helian Weiwei, she was a little stunned. Of course, Helian Jiao Air wouldn't let this matter go so easily. This was perhaps their one and only chance to make a comeback. They must seize it. Big sister, have you forgotten? Although official Liao hasn't announced everyone's serial number, the result of the appearance evaluation has been posted on the list. Helian Jiao smiled gently, as if everything she said was reasonable. That's why we feel that the result is a little unfair to Sister Yun. Yun Biluo's eyes were red. She smiled and shook her head. It's okay. I admit defeat. Although she said it was okay, she acted as if she was the one who suffered a loss. Helian Vivian had always admired these people because of her temper and character. She didn't learn how to act in front of others since she was young. She didn't know how to make people feel comfortable with her words. So, at that time, she had offended a lot of people and was stabbed many times. Later on, she became indifferent and mature. She wouldn't change herself to cater to others. She would only allow herself to stand higher and wantonly win this battle. Seeing that she didn't speak for a long time, Helian Jiao thought that Helian Vivian didn't have enough confidence. She raised the corner of her mouth. Helian Vivian smiled and said, "As far as I know, the list only announces the serial number, but not the contestant's name. Why are you so sure that Miss Yun is number 11? Upon hearing that, Miss Lan glanced at Yun Biluo. Helian Vivian saw her reaction. Her thin lips curved with slight mockery. Don't tell me that Miss Yun has admitted that she's number 11? Yun Biluo didn't say anything. She bit her thin lips tightly and played dumb, huh? Princess Consort, although you won the first place, Sister Yun didn't do anything wrong. Why are you talking about her like that? Miss Lan was very hot-blooded when it came to helping others. It was just that she couldn't tell right from wrong. This made Helian Vivian very annoyed. If a person did something wrong, there was always a reason to forgive her. Because in life, who didn't make mistakes? Letting others off the hook was equivalent to letting oneself off the hook. However, if a person did something wrong and thought that she wasn't wrong, then Helian Vivian didn't need to talk to her. She should just kill her. Lord Liao, announce everyone's serial number. Chapter 427. When Yun Biluo heard Helian Vivian's words, she did not know why, but she felt a little uneasy in her heart. The official with the surname Liao also wanted to announce the results as soon as possible. However, he did not know what each person's corresponding serial number was. The answer was with the steward, who was in charge of recording. This was because when these beauties entered the venue today, they would show their serial numbers before reporting their names. Therefore, he was not sure who was who. He only glanced at the steward. The steward reacted quickly. He shook the rice paper in his hand and read aloud, the first place of the appearance evaluation, serial number 11, name, Helian Vivian. What? How could this be? Miss Lan looked at Yun Biluo subconsciously. Sister Yun this. Yun Biluo suppressed her emotions deeply. Her eyes were still red and pitiful. When you mentioned it in the beginning, I didn't take the appearance evaluation seriously, so I didn't pay much attention to it. Now that I think about it, it was indeed my negligence. As she spoke, she raised her head and looked at Helian Vivian. After all, I'm in the wrong. It's right for the princess to blame me. However, I didn't have the intention to pretend to be the first place. Sister Lan and the rest didn't think so as well. Please don't misunderstand, princess. This sentence sounded like an apology, but in reality, it was just saying that Weiwei had misunderstood her and wronged her. Helian Vivian smiled. Her eyes were cold and her voice was calm. Miss Yun, you and I both know what the truth is. If you go overboard with your acting, be careful that you won't be able to clean up the mess. When Yun Biluo heard this, her eyes reddened and tears were about to fall. However, at this point, those who were standing below the stage could also see the truth. Of course, there were also those who were confused. They thought that Yun Biluo was wronged but did not explain clearly, resulting in such a misunderstanding. However, no matter how she pretended to be innocent, it was useless. The well-deserved number 1 was Hellion Vivian. Hellion Jiao knew that if she didn't say anything now, Hellion Vivian would steal all the limelight, so she put on a fake smile and said, "Big sis, since you already know that you're number 1 in the facial evaluation, why didn't you reveal your face and serial number? We were all worried about you for a long time." This sentence was obviously a trap. No matter how Hellion Weiwei answered, it would smear a layer of black on today's victory. This was exactly what Hellion Jiao had in mind. However, Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a smile. Naturally, I have my own reasons for not revealing my face and serial number. It's because I discovered something. Ever since the day the results were released, someone has been trying to stop me from coming to today's selection. They even wanted to get rid of me directly. I also caught a few people. I can bring them here and ask them who sent them to investigate me. I want to know who the mastermind behind this is. Little 7th Prince. Third sister-in-law, I'm here. Little 7th Prince appeared from the crowd with a fierce look on his face. He held a meat bun in one hand and a dog-beating stick in the other. He drove a few yamen runners to the stage. Not only Hellion Jiao, but even Lord Liao also panicked when he saw those bailiffs. He quickly stood up and said, "How dare you? How dare you make trouble for the princess consort? Someone, take these people away. Beat them hard."
Wait.
Hellion Vivian stopped him. Her voice was neither fast nor slow. "Official Liao, I haven't asked them yet. Why are you in such a hurry?" For some reason at that moment, Liao Wulian actually felt that the aura emitted from this young girl was exactly the same as the third prince that he didn't want to provoke. At this moment, Beligaju was sitting in his original position. He supported his chin with one hand and looked at the scene casually. There was a playful look in his eyes. His prey was playing again. This was good. When she was done, he would deal with those who should be dealt with. Big sister. Hellion Jiao also became anxious. In front of so many people, especially in front of the third prince, whom she once admired the most, if those people really sold her out, then the image that she'd painstakingly restored in the capital for so many days would also disappear. After she finished calling out "eldest sister," she again softened her voice. "This kind of people, what are you keeping them for? They are a bunch of people who don't do anything. You also know that they are people who take the public grain." Hellion Vivian looked at her with her arms around her shoulders. "Since you are so smart, you should be able to see that they are wearing the same clothes as official Yao's men. Moreover, as far as I know, just yesterday, you met with them. Why are you pretending that you don't know them today?" Hellion Jiao's eyes shook violently. "Big sister, what are you talking about? I don't understand at all." "You don't understand?" Hellion Vivian laughed. Then, she stretched out her left hand and snapped her fingers. With a swoosh sound, the mercenary in black knelt in front of her. "Tell me what you saw in the past 2 days."
Yes.
The mercenary was wearing a half mask and said in a low voice, "Ever since young master got the number, Hellion Jiao has been asking these people to search for young master's whereabouts. She even thought that young master was just a village girl. She had personally ordered them to kill the weeds and get rid of the roots when they see you." When everyone heard this, there was an uproar. Hellion Vivian looked indifferently at Hellion Jiao, who was standing in front of her. "I am just a little prettier than you, and you want to kill the weeds and get rid of the roots. Madame Su really raised a good daughter. You?" Hellion Jiao took a deep breath. She knew that this was not the time to fight head-on. Tears fell from her beautiful eyes. "Big sister, think about it carefully. What are these people's identities? You saw yourself. They are all yamen runners. Even if I am the second miss of the general's residence, I can't command these yamen runners." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "You can't command them, but there is someone who can. What do you think, Lord Liao? This official knows nothing about this matter. Liao Wuliang's forehead overflowed with sweat. Princess Consort, you don't know. These Yamen runners only obey on the surface, but disobey on the inside. Sometimes I don't even know what they do. Hellion Vivian smiled. In other words, this matter has nothing to do with you and Hellion Jiaoer. They made the decision themselves? Lord Liao, do you think I am a fool? As for why you allow your subordinates to be ordered around by Hellion Jiaoer, I think this reason should be made known to your wife. That would be good. Chapter 428. As she spoke, Hellion Weiwei did not look at the two people whose faces had suddenly turned pale. Instead, she lowered her eyes and stroked little Seven's head. Go and invite Madame Liao over. I'll give her a gift so that she can recognize someone. There's no need for the seventh prince to make an extra trip. A confident female voice came from the crowd, with the unique fire of a middle-aged woman. Princess, please continue. I can hear everything. Hellion Weiwei raised her eyes and looked at the figure. Her voice was faint as she said, since Madame Liao is here too, then I will say whatever I want to say. I have a few letters here that clearly state what Liao Wuliang and Hellion Jiaoer have been doing for the past 2 days. Both of them are in love and both of them are very happy. When Hellion Vivian spoke until here, everyone had already understood. Their gazes shifted to Hellion Jiaoer, full of contempt and ridicule. I didn't expect Hellion Jiaoer to be this kind of person. God, that Liao Wuliang is more than 10 years older than her. More than 10 years older. Don't forget, Liao and Hellion Jiaoer studied under the same master. Usually, when Hellion Jiaoer sees Liao Wuliang, she has to call him uncle. I didn't expect the two of them to be together. It's disgusting. I've never seen such a despicable woman. That man is not a good person either. Madame Liao listened to the words around her. She couldn't bear it anymore. She had a bad temper. When she was with Liao Wuliang, it was because she liked him and her family was powerful that the two of them got together. For so many years, Liao Wuliang was able to get to where he was today because of her family's help. She did not expect that he dared to do such a dirty thing behind her back. More importantly, the other party was the Hellion Jiaoer, whom she had watched grow up. Thinking of this, Madame Liao's body shook violently. She didn't look at the letter in Hellion Vivian's hand and rushed directly to Hellion Jiaoer. Madame Liao reached out and grabbed Hellion Jiaoer's hair, pulling it hard. Are you shameless? Is that what your mother taught you? Who told you to go around seducing men? It hurts. Let go of me. Hellion Jiaoer just wanted to find a hole and hide in it. She never thought that Hellion Vivian would know about her relationship with Liao Wuliang, and even announced it in such a way. A great sense of panic overwhelmed her. What should she do in the future? How was she supposed to get married? Even if she was the reincarnation of the Phoenix girl, who would marry her? Thinking of this, the Hellion Jiaoer struggled even harder. Without thinking, she retaliated, I told you to let go of me. Didn't you hear me? Hellion Vivian, you've wronged me. You're spreading rumors about me. You just can't bear to see me doing well. If you have the ability, then pull the shrew away from me. Let's face each other. Who are you calling a shrew, you little bitch? When Madame Liao heard Hellion Jiaoer's words, she exerted even more strength in her hands. She pulled a handful of her hair off. Hellion Jiaoer was in extreme pain. She directly used all of her martial qi and kicked her to the ground. Madame Liao was in pain. She clutched her stomach and fell to the ground, crying and screaming. From the beginning to the end, Hellion Vivian just looked at this scene indifferently with a cold look in her eyes. Lord Liao was in the middle, trying to stop her. His official robe was in a mess. Even his hat was tilted to one side. He wanted to help Madame Liao up, but was pushed to the side by Madame Liao. Then he took a heavy step back. Then he felt a black shadow coming from behind him. The pressure was so strong that he didn't need to turn around to know who was behind him. Liao Wuliang, you've done well. It was just a few words, and there was a smile between the lips. But the evil murderous aura that surged out from the man's eyes made him kneel on the ground in fear. Bang, bang, bang. He kowtowed. Your Highness, please spare me. This official didn't do it on purpose. This official didn't know that it would be the princess. As he said, he pointed at Hellion Jiaoer. It's all her fault. She seduced this official. This official was just blinded by lust. Before Liao Wuliang could finish the word blinded, Hellion Jiaoer tore at him. You disgusting old man, how dare you say that I seduced you? It was you who kept using your eyes to look at me. If it wasn't to get rid of others, do you think I would be nice to you? Hellion Jiaoer had already started to shoot her mouth off to the point that even she herself didn't know what she was saying anymore. The current her didn't have the appearance of the capital's most talented girl from before. That exquisite face already lost its makeup, and her hair was disheveled like a living lunatic. Bailey Jiaju's tall and slender figure stood there, the cloak on his body fluttering in the wind. His posture was calm and elegant. His eyes slowly swept over the man and woman who were about to twist into a ball. His voice was cold as he issued an order. Take all of them away and kill them. Kill? Kill? After hearing these two words, not only Hellion Jiaoer and Liao Wuliang stopped, but even Madame Liao stopped crying. She wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes and crawled toward Beligaju. Your Highness, although my husband is also at fault, he didn't know that it was the princess. If he knew, he definitely wouldn't dare to do this. The one who really wants to hurt the princess is that little bitch. My husband was just framed by her. You mean to say that a beauty who is not the princess can be framed at will? Beligaju glanced at the corner of his clothes that was touched by Madame Liao. His long eyebrows frowned, and the temperature in his eyes became a few degrees colder. Take them away and kill them. Madame Liao was stunned and fell to the ground. She watched Liao Wuliang and that little bitch Hellion Jiaoer being dragged away together. She was completely dumbfounded. Hellion Jiaoer tossed her limbs and shouted at the top of her voice, I want to see my mother. I want to see my grandfather. Your Highness, you can't kill me like this. You will regret it. Don't forget, I am the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. If I die, the War Dragon Empire will be destroyed. Do you want to be the heir of a destroyed empire? Probably because Hellion Jiaoer's voice was too loud, the shadow guards subconsciously stopped their actions and looked at His Highness. Beligaju slowly brushed his outer clothes. His tone was neither fast nor slow. He slightly raised his eyes, as if he was born with indifference. It was an indifference that looked down on all living beings. With a cold voice, it only said one word, kill. Everyone also felt that Hellion Jiaoer should be killed. Such a woman is the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl? That's not enough to make them feel ashamed. Madame Liao didn't want her husband to die. Seeing that Beligaju's side didn't work, she crawled to Hellion Vivian's side. Princess, you are a reasonable person. My husband just couldn't control himself. Chapter 429. Madame Liao. Hellion Weiwei's voice slowly interrupted her. Liao Wuliang is an official of the imperial court, but he used the power in his hands to persecute the harem girls on behalf of others. Just based on this point alone, his head should be chopped off. This is not something that can be controlled. And Hellion Vivian paused and said clearly, back then, when my mother's husband was snatched away by your good friend Su Yanemo, what did you say? You didn't care if my mother was seriously injured, went to the general's residence, pointed at my mother, and asked my mother to give up her position to your good friend. Madame Liao, after so many years, you lived a carefree life, but when my mother was mentioned, you scolded her as a jealous woman. How you and Su Yanemo framed my mother. The heavens are watching and people are living. It was not that he did not want to take revenge, but that the time had not yet come. Now your retribution is here, so take it well. Otherwise, How can you be worthy of the gift I gave you? Madame Liao's expression became worse as she listened, as if she was angry and embarrassed. Her chest churned, and blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth. Only now did she understand that the reason why Helian Weiwei did this was merely for revenge. She wanted to deal with them the same way they treated her mother. Retribution. All of this was really retribution. Madame Liao fell heavily to the ground and no longer said anything. As if she had lost her mind, she stared blankly at a point in the distance, crying and laughing at the same time. Eunuch's son directly asked someone to send her back to the Liao residence so that His Highness and the princess would not see her. After such a scene, everyone was shocked, not only because of Helian Vivian's appearance and talent. Also, the thing that they believed in back then was actually false. Master Helian, who was regarded as a jealous woman, was the most miserable one. The true love that they pitted turned out to be a pair of scum and a bitch. And Madame Liao, in their hearts, Madame Liao had always been the image of fighting for justice for others. Unexpectedly, she was not fighting for justice, but because her own people were in the wrong, she wanted to slander others first. At that moment, some people were silent, especially when they saw the girl standing on the stage, facing the wind. They felt guilty from the bottom of their hearts. There were also some people who did not care about this at all, such as Yun Biluo. She was very smart. She knew that in this situation, it was useless for her to say anything. She might even get herself into trouble. Therefore, she lowered her eyes at the right time, minimizing her presence as much as possible. Her hands clenched tighter and tighter. Everything had been planned out well. Yun Biluo did not expect that the Helian Jiaoer would be taken away because of this. Now, Helian Vivian had won. She didn't even have the chance to be a concubine anymore, I declare. The winner this time is the third princess consort, Helian Vivian. Eunuch's son shouted excitedly. In other words, His Highness didn't need to have a secondary consort. In the end, it was still the princess consort who was more powerful. Eunuch's son thought happily, only to find that as soon as his voice fell, an unknown uproar came from the crowd. What is that? It looks like roses? So many roses. 10 cars. Wait, it doesn't look like just roses? And weapons? Just when the crowd was still confused, Helian Vivian leaped. Her palms moved slightly, and all the wind obeyed her command. A breeze blew, and rose petals flew into the sky along with her robe. When the petals rose, her left hand was in the pocket of her robe lazily, and her right hand was holding a big bouquet of roses. Her long chestnut hair was evenly spread over her beautiful face, and her small earlobes were adorned with shiny silver studs. Baligaju raised his eyebrows and looked at her. There was a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, with a seductive look of confusion. Helian Vivian looked at him and smiled faintly. Then, she knelt on the ground handsomely. All the petals moved with her movements, like a shower of flowers, flying and dazzling. At that moment, Baligaju seemed to hear the beating of his blood. What is she doing? Everyone was stunned by the scene in front of them. As long as they stretched out their hands, they would be able to touch the beautiful rose petals. The fragrance of the flowers was everywhere, and it felt like they were in a dream. Most importantly, why did the princess consort hold a big bouquet of roses and kneel in front of the third prince? Eunuch's son didn't understand, so he gave a look to the little seventh prince, hoping that his little master would tell him something. But, from the beginning, the seventh prince only had eyes for food. Now he was like a little tiger waiting for an opportunity, looking at the petals that were close to him. Which one would he grab to eat? In the whole world, perhaps only young Master He knew what Helian Vivian was thinking. It was just to chase after his wife. You didn't hear wrongly, it was to chase after his wife. Cough. Helian Vivian first cleared her throat, then laughed. Her midnight eyes had an indescribable affection. I have something to give you. If you accept it, you will be mine in the future. No matter if you are poor or rich, no matter if you live or die, you can only belong to me. How about it? Baligaju looked at her. His originally cold eyes gradually became as clear as spring water, as pure and innocent as an angel. He didn't say yes or no. At this time, Heizei couldn't hold back anymore. When he heard Hellion Vivian finally ask, he hurriedly shouted, "Accept her! Accept her!" He didn't know if it was because he shouted the sentence. Even more blessings rang out from all directions. Beligaju's lips curled up, and his eyes had a meaningful black-bellied look. "All right, I will let you monopolize me. Tonight, I will let you monopolize me." I knew that the proposal was definitely a killer move to chase after his wife. Hellion Vivian smiled as she took out a small black suede box from her pocket and opened it, revealing 2 thin white gold rings. The rings weren't inlaid with any jewels. There was only a twisted wave in the middle, one to the left and one to the right. When the two overlapped, it just happened to be a small white gold heart. She was just about to put it on Beligaju when he picked her up. Her long black hair fell vertically along with the cloak, sweeping across the cold stairs and expensive carpet. In an instant, discussions and exclamations sounded like a tide, covering all the prosperity in this world. Because they simply couldn't believe what they saw. That godlike existence of a man. Their most noble and indifferent royal family actually took the initiative to carry a woman. Hellion Vivian naturally felt these burning gazes. She helplessly buried her head in the man's fragrant chest. Chapter 430. Beligaju hugged the person leaning against the bookshelf. As proud as he was, he would never tell the person in his arms that he was the one who couldn't let go. It was like a person who had been crawling in the dark for a long time suddenly coming into contact with the first ray of sunlight. It would be scorching and dazzling. Instinctively, he wanted to hold on tight and never let go. The fierce collision brought out a sweet numbness that made Hellion Vivian tighten her grip on the stack of books. The rice paper fell all over the floor. She could hear the noise behind her, but she couldn't care less. Ultimate happiness was more important than anything else. Understanding each other made them closer. They even fell in love with the feeling of being so close to each other. The servants outside were also smart. They pretended not to hear anything even if they heard anything. There were also ministers who came to look for them. After all, such a big thing happened outside, and the Hellion Jower was beheaded just like that. Whether it was the general's residence or Prime Minister Su's side, it would not be peaceful. However, those who dared to say anything to Beligaju were Hellion Jower, after all, had committed the crime of deliberately killing the princess. Apart from the elders of the 4 influential families, no matter how much trouble the rest of them made, they would not be able to stir up any big waves. Su Yanamo was about to cry her eyes out. She couldn't even enter the palace. It had only been 2 months, but the Su family had unknowingly fallen to such a state. Madame Su slowly realized that the power that once belonged to her was disappearing bit by bit. She originally thought that she didn't have to care about Hellion Vivian at all. Even if she had martial chi, even if she had become the 3rd princess consort. However, she was just a little orphan. How could she fight against monstrous power? She didn't expect that she would be so steady. First, she cut off her source of income in Jiangnan. Then, she used the weapon manufacturing incident to give her father a huge setback. Since that day, the 3 words, Prime Minister Su, would cause a burst of laughter in the imperial court. Now, that little bastard, actually. How dare he kill her most precious daughter? Su Yanmo's eyes reddened. Everything happened too quickly. They didn't have time to think of a solution or use their connections. What could be more cruel than a white-haired person sending off a black-haired person before her own death? It was all because of that little bastard. If it wasn't for her, how could the mother and daughter have fallen to such a state? One died in the Yellow Springs, while the other lost his reputation. She must make that little bastard pay the price. Didn't she want to come back? She just wouldn't let her have her way. Sue, and go and make the arrangements. Use all the connections you have with my father. I want to know the current general of the Hidden Army. No matter how much money you have to spend, find him for me.
Yes.
Also, go to the elders of the various clans and ask them if there should be an explanation for the death of the Phoenix girl.
Yes.
After you're done with this, go to the stewards of the Hellion family and make sure that they stand on Master's side during the clan meeting. I want to see with my own eyes that little bastard get chased out of this house like a stray dog. Yes, madam. After Suan left, Su Yenmo's entire face was twisted with hatred. Now, she didn't want anything else but to let Hellion Vivian have a taste of what it means to lose. It was night, and the fog was thick. In the bustling long alley, the people were gradually disappearing, leaving only a tall and straight shadow. That person was wearing a white robe, and behind him was a little person carrying a gourd. Master. The little person couldn't help but raise his head to look at his expression. He then reached out and touched his finger. It was so cold. The little person couldn't help but worry. Master, let's go back. His master had been standing here for a whole day. If he continued to stand there, his body wouldn't be able to take it. The man coughed softly. His ink-like eyes looked like they could overflow with water, gentle and clean. Did you see that just now? Cough, she was proposing to him. Master. The little person hurriedly said, Master, you said before that she hasn't fully awakened yet. Wait until the day she really wakes up. She'll recognize you. The man laughed softly and reached out to support his forehead. A storm swept in from behind him. The dark clouds were mixed with too much resentment. Go, think of a way to wake her up. Yes, masters. Scarlet eyes filled every corner of the street. That kind of evil and gloomy foreordained that there would be no peace in the future. Hellion Weiwei woke up from a nightmare. She absent-mindedly looked at the person lying beside her. That handsome face, under the thin light of dawn, seemed to have become somewhat unreal. Hellion Vivian looked at him for a while, then raised her finger and poked. Beligaju's long eyebrows furrowed. Just as he was about to tell those who disturbed his peace to scram, just like before. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Hellion Vivian in his arms. A man who had just woken up was the sexiest and deadliest. Hellion Vivian didn't fully understand this saying before. Now that she saw His Highness, she realized that there was actually a man in this world who made her want to pounce on him the moment she saw him. What do you want to eat later? Beligaju moved her finger over and kissed it. Hellion Vivian began to think about this question seriously. In the end, she gave Beligaju a difficult question. I want to eat tiramisu. What's that? Beligaju raised his eyebrows. He had never heard of it before. Hellion Vivian licked her thin lips and explained, it's a kind of cake. When it enters the mouth, it's soft, sweet, and a little bitter. I want to eat it. Soft, sweet, and a little astringent? Bailey Jiaju looked at her. Suddenly, he leaned over and kissed her lips. This? Hellion Vivian smiled and kissed him back. No, but I don't think you can buy it here. Let's eat apricot cake. It's the same. Okay. Beligaju agreed, but he didn't think so in his heart. Hellion Vivian's words let him know what the place she used to live was like. There was a snack called tiramisu, but there was no such thing here. Beligaju's eyes darkened, and he tightened his grip on her. Hellion Vivian took a bite of the apricot cake and looked at him with puffed cheeks. What's wrong? Nothing. Beligaju knew that she was starving, and the two of them didn't leave the bed. The snack box was at hand, and there were many snacks in it. He wiped the crumbs from the corner of her mouth. When she was eating, she didn't forget to feed him a bite and said, "This one is more delicious." Basically, he ate whatever she gave him. When Eunuch's son saw this, he was amazed in his heart. His Highness didn't like to eat at the same table with others since he was young. When he grew up, which one of them didn't use the most luxurious things? Now, he was not picky about food, was easy to serve, and was cured of his misophobia. It should be celebrated by the whole country. But Chapter 431. Eunuch's son found that he was wrong. His Highness was only obsessed with the princess. When it came to them, it was the same. Get rid of them. Don't get blood everywhere. Beligaju stood outside the palace and wiped his fingers with a white handkerchief. He looked at the people kneeling on the ground. In the future, don't let this Highness hear the words bring disaster to the country and its people. Yes, yes. The eunuchs in charge were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. When they looked at the face of the royal prince, they saw that his expression changed every minute. That faint smile, it was obvious that the princess had come. They knew the rules and immediately retreated. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Was she that ugly? When they saw her, it was like they had seen a ghost. She had clearly recovered her appearance. What's the matter with these eunuchs? Hellion Vivian asked a certain highness who was standing on the side. Beligaju pulled her over and said in a calm voice, "They're probably in a hurry to go back and eat." Hellion Weiwei. "Please, this lie of yours is too obvious, okay?" Bailey Jia Ju smiled and kissed Hellion Weiwei's forehead as she squinted her eyes. He laughed softly and said, "I'll carry you inside. I'm sure you'll like the lunch I made today." Hellion Vivian was a person who knew how to enjoy life. She was a bit tired after staying up so late yesterday. Plus, there was nothing to do in the palace. When she read novels, it always mentioned that there were all kinds of chaos in the palace, all kinds of battles, all kinds of fights, and all kinds of disturbances. She wanted to show off her domineering aura at the right time and move a certain someone. Unexpectedly, the palace was as peaceful as the villa she used to live in. She basically didn't have to do anything every day. She only needed to enjoy life. Every day, she would play with her martial arts and pistols, tease Eunuch Sun, and watch Xiao Qi do a hip dance. There was no better life than this. Of course, there were always those who didn't know better. Hellion Vivian looked at the paper in her hand, and her thin lips curled up. Since these two want to get close to the hidden army so badly, let's give them some benefits. Yes. The man in black lowered his eyes. Hellion Vivian waved her hand and dismissed him. When she looked up again, Beligaju had just finished washing his hands. His Highness had to wash his hands countless times a day. Thanks to his habit, she was free to do something else. Otherwise, apart from eating, he would only be sleeping. She couldn't help but suspect that his Highness was raising her like this. Was he planning to slaughter her like a little pig and stew her into soup one day? Beligaju heard her thoughts and smiled evilly. You're like this. Even if you're cooked and eaten, it's not as tasty as it is now. Don't let your imagination run wild. Eat more. Why did she feel like she was being attacked again? Hellion Vivian didn't feel uncomfortable being held in Beligaju's arms. Anyway, she was used to it. These 2 days, he carried her here and there. His posture was so handsome that she was happy and relaxed. When it came to things like being fed, Beligaju treated her like he was raising a daughter. She couldn't eat this, eat less that, eat more fruits, and so on. Often, Hellion Vivian would feel sleepy as she ate. She yawned and said, "I'm not full yet." Beligaju hugged Hellion Vivian and closed his eyes. His voice was clear and noble. "If you want to sleep, I'll ask them to make red bean pies for you later." Hellion Vivian nodded and closed her eyes. "Pies are good. I love them, yes. I love them too." Little Seventh Prince stood beside the bed and nodded his head heavily. Beligaju got up and put his outer robe on Hellion Vivian, who was sleeping soundly. He looked at Little Seventh Prince condescendingly. "What's the matter?" "Third brother, I also want to eat red bean pies." Little Seventh Prince vigorously fought for his own benefits. Beligaju slowly buttoned his shirt. His voice was unhurried. "If you don't say what's the matter, you won't have a share of the pies. Little Black that I picked up some time ago is gone." The Little Black that Little Seventh Prince mentioned was the very mighty and domineering magical beast that could flatten the entire White Academy with a stomp of its feet. Beligaju picked him up and put him on the wooden chair. "It's injured. Of course it will go back. I haven't fed it dragon meat yet." Little Seventh Prince expressed that he was very unwilling to accept this outcome. "I still want to ride it and go to the deep sea to hunt dragons. Beligaju glanced at him. You want to grow out those 2 teeth of yours before you think about hunting dragons. Little 7th Prince was recently growing out his teeth. When he smiled, one could see the missing part. That scene was very comical. All the servants found it funny when they saw it. But no one dared to mention it. Really, no one dared to mention it. They were afraid that this little tiger would directly bite them if it was unhappy. Don't look at how 7th Prince was soft and cute in front of Master and Princess Consort. But usually he was just a little poker face. He was even harder to deal with than Master. Of course, in fact, if he really made 7th Prince unhappy, he could completely use delicious food to deal with him. But to say the matter of his missing teeth so straightforwardly like now, they didn't know if 7th Prince could bear it. Eunuch's son looked at his little master with pity in his eyes. He really couldn't bear it and came up to coax him. 7th Prince, why don't you go with the servant to the imperial kitchen to see if the fish you caught this morning is ready? Haven't you always wanted to eat fish? Little 7th Prince looked up at the sky sadly. After thinking carefully, he said expressionlessly, "All right, that's the only way." He couldn't beat third brother. Then let's go, 7th Prince. Eunuch's son stretched out a hand. Little 7th Prince also stretched out his hand and held his hand. Then, with a domineering and serious face, he said, "Eunuch's son, tell me, if I don't have this tooth, will it affect my handsomeness? Will it?" Eunuch's son lowered his eyes and looked at the little incisors that were leaking air when he spoke. He desperately held back his laughter and coughed twice before saying, "It won't affect. You have good taste." Little 7th Prince heard the answer he wanted to hear and returned to his usual noble poker face. Wherever he went, no one dared to provoke him. On the other hand, Hellion Vivian was a little restless. The scene in the dream was getting clearer and clearer. She felt more and more resentment. That person really wanted to come back. But it didn't seem that she would give up her body when she came back. If it was in the past, Hellion Wei Wei would definitely return this body to him. But now, she had her own reasons for not wanting to leave. She didn't know if she would meet such a person again. He looked cold and heartless, but doted on her to the bone. Chapter 432. Pitter-patter. Raindrops fell on the wide leaves. Eunuchs and palace maids were walking back and forth in the imperial garden. There was only a remote area that was specially blocked by a few shadow guards. In the quiet pavilion, the retired emperor stood with his hands behind his back. He glanced at his favorite grandson and said, "Ah, Ju, tell me the truth. That girl, Wei Wei, has her body been taken over?" After the death of the Hellion Jiaoer, the people of the 4 great families completely lost their composure. They insisted that the new princess was possessed and used all means to confuse the world. Even the royal family killed the Phoenix girl for her. They would face the fate of being destroyed in the future. Now that things had escalated to this point, he had to ask. Now that the Dragon War Empire was still in his hands, he was the one who coordinated all the forces involved. He could do anything according to Ah Ju. He could do whatever he wanted. But if it was a possessed person, the retired emperor lowered his eyes. He really didn't know what he would do. "She's not." Beligaju's tone was indifferent. His expression didn't change. "She's just a little smarter than before." Such a small thing actually became a topic of gossip. The retired emperor smiled. "That girl is not just a little smarter. If she's really the one who possessed the body, her main target should be the royal family, not the remnants of the Su family." Beligaju shook the teacup in his hand. The silver ring on his ring finger made his hands look even more noble. "If she didn't marry me, no one would say that about her." When the retired emperor heard this, he couldn't bear it and sighed. "You're the prince of the Dragon War Empire. So many eyes are watching you. It's normal for someone to take advantage of the slightest mistake and make an issue of it." Speaking of this, the retired emperor paused and said, "If Wei Wei is really possessed, what are you going to do?" What else can I do? Of course, I can't let her go easily. When Baligija said this, he held the teacup and took a sip of the water inside. His eyes were so deep that no one could see any thoughts. The person waiting at the side heard this and frowned. The retired emperor patted him on the shoulder. A little girl, if she is a little too powerful, it will make people suspicious, especially when she is such a stepmother. Don't worry, grandfather will suppress this matter, but at the same time, you should be careful. Bailey Jiaju's voice was faint as he replied. After that, the two of them talked about something else. Third brother said that. The fifth prince, who was only a few years younger than Baligiju, laughed coldly. He is indeed a heartless person. Thanks to Hellion Vivian and Baligiju, he had been having a hard time recently. His mother was banished to the cold palace and was never allowed to leave. Her uncle was also killed for plotting a rebellion. Now, the entire Morong mansion was filled with white slips of paper. He, the fifth prince, was truly a good-for-nothing. Think of his glorious days in the past, and look at him now. The fifth prince clenched his fists and looked at the woman behind him. Miss Yun, please give me an idea. A woman dressed in shadow slowly walked out, but her face was covered by gauze. Her voice was soft as she lowered her eyes and asked the eunuch, "Did the third prince say that we can't let him off lightly?" "Yes, His Highness also said that the imperial palace will definitely not tolerate a person who is possessed." The servant lowered his head even more. It sounds like he doesn't take the princess consort seriously. The fifth prince was not satisfied. "If that's the case, how am I going to deal with him?" "Calm down, Your Highness." Yun Biluo laughed softly. The royal family doesn't take Hellion Vivian seriously, huh? I wonder how Hellion Vivian will feel when she hears this. The fifth prince was suddenly enlightened. "You're thinking of, great. What a brilliant plan. Eunuchly, write down the conversation you overheard and send it to my heartless and lazy third sister-in-law. Let's see how they'll fight against each other." "Yes." Eunuchly bowed and left. Before he left, he glanced at Yun Biluo again. Logically speaking, Yun Biluo was called back by the Empress to help them drive a wedge between the retired emperor and the royal family. Now that the Empress had lost her power, Yun Biluo did not kick her when she was down. Instead, she helped the little master to deal with that person. However, he still felt that he could not figure it out. What could he do even if he could not figure it out? He had to take a gamble before the retired emperor sent the little master to the frontier. Only then would he have a chance to survive. Dusk. Baligiju, who was dressed in white and black, was sitting in the south study room, reading the memorials in his hands. The ancient scrolls in his hands always gave off a different vibe. No one would believe that those hands could be so ruthless when it came to killing. Your Highness." An official who was kneeling in the south study room did not dare to stand up after such a long time. The brush in Baligiju's hand paused. When he saw the silver ring on his ring finger, his eyes softened a little. "You may leave. Don't do this again." Leave? The official could not believe what he heard. He swallowed hard. Happiness came too suddenly. He was not ready yet. What should he do? Baligiju thought for a while and said, "Forget it. You don't have to leave." The official was speechless. "No. I beg of you, Your Highness. I'd better leave." Although happiness came too suddenly, it was better than no happiness at all. "I heard that you have many concubines," Baligiju continued in a flat tone. The official straightened his neck and shouted, "That's just a rumor?" Baligiju put down the brush in his hand and raised his long and narrow phoenix eyes. The official immediately became honest. He put his fingers together and said, In fact, it's not too many. Just a dozen. It's over. His Highness would not directly confiscate his house because of this matter, right? If His Highness insisted on doing so, he would die in front of him. How do you usually coax them? What? The official felt that there was something wrong with his ears. Trembling, he raised his head in shock. After confirming that it was his master who was asking, he tentatively replied, How do I coax them? What can make those women happy? Baligaja's voice was very light. His long eyebrows slightly wrinkled. The official was stunned. His Highness was seriously asking him now. Your Highness, you don't have to do anything. Just stand there and show your face. They will faint. He had never been so honest before. Baligaju rubbed the side of his face with his fingers and smiled evilly. She really likes this face of mine. The most handsome man in the world. Who doesn't like him? The official looked at his master and then looked at his fat body. He suddenly felt sad. He always felt that the heavens were unfair. Besides the face. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.